Chapter 116. I suddenly thought. I've never been cruel or ruthless. In my past life, as in this one, I was a nice, intelligent boy, a joy to my parents. Why did it become so easy for me to kill people? The old man who wanted to sacrifice me to the grimoire, there was self-defense, but even then, I felt a slight tremor, although I ignored it. I killed Malfoy without a doubt, and as casually as if I chop off people's heads every day. I also killed Pettigrew just because he's an asshole and would have brought Voldemort back to life, and I was worried about keeping the canon events intact until recently. Yet, maybe some of it came from the demon, but just a little. It made me feel better about life, so to speak. And maybe I had always been like that, but I hid that attitude from myself. I took the diadem with telekinesis, dragged it to a clean spot on the floor, and knelt down next to it. Whatever the outcome, all options were good except for absorbing a piece of Voldemort. Yes, all are good. Do it already, I encouraged myself. Or you shouldn't have even started. I took the diadem with my hands. I need mental contact, like with a grimoire. If I simply shatter it with my sword, it may so happen that a shard of Voldemort will either perish or be absorbed, but the artifact will be irretrievably ruined, since the parcel tongue from the basilisk I got, as I believe, is by absorbing the soul, not by killing the creature itself. Without a second more, I quickly took and put on the diadem. 1 second, 2. Oh, without hiding my surprise, I began to look around the gloomy, monumental hall without windows or doors but with many columns. There were various bas-reliefs everywhere, heavy and crushing in their massiveness, and the semi-darkness gave the hall a slightly frightening atmosphere. I turned around at the voice. The grown-up Tom Riddle from the diary, a tall brown-haired man in a black business suit, obviously old-fashioned robe, and a cheeky but benevolent smile. I attributed the facial expression to the closet for a simple reason, a mask. The most natural one. I've never seen such a fake smile in my life. I can't even figure out what it is, but just the sight of that smile made me want to burn the place down with fiend fire, and maybe it would burn like everything else around it. Inquisitive young wizard, the man spoke up. Looks like the mystery of the Room of Requirement is no longer mine alone. Maybe with. I want to attack him now, but it's like something's in the way. Tisk tisk, Riddle stopped my speech with a gesture of his hand. No need to waste your energy, my inquisitive friend. May I ask you a question? But it's clear from his tone that he doesn't need an answer. I sense that you are pure blood, but I cannot recognize in you the traits of any of the English families. I don't mean to sound overly boastful, but I know them all. You do not want to answer a yes, where are my manners? Riddle threw up his hands pathetically as if addressing a huge audience. I am Lord Voldemort. He stared at me for a few seconds, but without waiting for a reaction, he just moved his hand a little. A powerful invisible force pressed down on me so that I almost collapsed to my knees, but I held on, concentrated, and threw off the obsession. Riddle was a step away from me. The younger generation isn't so hopeless. I waved my hand from my hip, forming a magical construct of a spiral air fist. Cumilaris. The spell slammed into Riddle, tearing the right half of his torso and scattering shreds of dark substance around. The remnants of Riddle stood smiling at me, conjuring up the image of Alucard from Helsing in my mind. An intriguing knowledge of magic, my inquisitive friend. Riddle recovered in a split second. Interesting, but useless. With a simple wave of his hand, he sent me flying, and then with my own spell, Riddle sent me to the floor, knocking out the spirit. Interesting, Riddle looked at me with the same smirk, standing beside me. You're tougher than you look. Then his gaze slid to my left arm. Black great. As I had done during the battle with the grimoire demon, I sped up to maximum speed. In the intangible world, my acceleration limit is much higher. Immediately I materialized my sword and began to shred Riddle, but the effect was about the same as a spell. It took only a couple of moments for the smiling soul shard to catch up with my speed and deftly dodge the sword. For a few moments, Riddle stared at the sword flitting past his head, and then his smile wiped away, giving way to a completely neutral expression. In the same instant, he was gone, a dozen yards away. That's what I don't understand. I think you will become a wonderful vessel. Don't you think so, my inquisitive friend? Surprisingly, not even a short moment passed when I was again next to him, accelerating even faster. Still, I heard what he said as if we were having a leisurely conversation over a glass of whiskey. That's enough. Just one word, and it was like I was paralyzed, and Riddle plunged his hand into my chest with a swing. It went like a knife through butter. I felt like Neo and Agent Smith against me. I think, Riddle was saying, and I suddenly began to realize that I was acting in a one-sided and strange way. You, my inquisitive friend. It's like I'm limited. Limited in my actions. It's as if the world around me won't even let me think of a better course of action. But it's a fictional world. A mental projection of Voldemort's will or the essence of an artifact. You had no idea. But since it's a fictional world. Wait, idea, where are you going? Don't give up. This is something important. How it will turn out, use your brain. Use your mind. This is a battle of the mind, even if it looks like a fight. The mind. Triad of being. The shard is a damaged soul. The shard's mind is just as damaged, and even if it were stronger, it is incomplete. The soul, your curiosity. Chapter 117. My soul is not just ordinary. Pride is a sin, of course, but right now, I'm bigger, better, stronger. Young Lord Black. Which means you're screwed. Swimming out of my own thoughts, I looked into Riddle's eyes. That's right, Muggle scum, I smirked back at Riddle. Even though I have nothing against any strata of the population, castes, and classes, it is a sacred thing to bring an opponent out of balance. I love to see Riddle's face contort in rage, and his eyes flashed red. I am. He yelled in my face. Lord Volda. Dead, I stabbed my hand into his chest without a swing. What? You dare me? Destroy my mind, my will, my world around me, and I don't care if it's not so. Riddle was instantly enveloped in a whirlwind of blood, raising a terrifying rumble and wind in the semi-darkness of the hall. The human mind is where true freedom lies, the absence of limits and boundaries. Voldemort, rather than Riddle, tried to emerge from the vortex. Bald and noseless, with his face open in a mute scream, as if he were trying to break through a canvas of dark red silk. But it was all in vain. I understood a simple thing. Will and faith are the tools of the battle of the minds. So was the soul. Yet even Voldemort's peace was strong and was beginning to break free, despite the pressure and force with which I sought to destroy it. Well. There was a quiet rustling and grinding of something hard against the stone behind me. Without even turning around, I could feel the presence of a real train of organics. The presence of something cold and it was as if it were an extension of my body. I could feel the basilisk's head hovering behind my right shoulder, and Voldemort suddenly began to slow down in his movements. I knew exactly what I had to do, but I couldn't. I couldn't just take Voldemort's shard and destroy it without a pose. Pulling my left hand toward the giant bloody vortex, I snapped my fingers, and all that blood spun even faster, immediately starting to shrink and turn from a vortex pillar into a sphere. Smaller and smaller. Occasionally there were protrusions on its surface as if someone was trying to get out, but it was in vain, and soon there was a dense sphere of dark, almost black blood, no bigger than a volleyball in front of me. Without a sweep, as if with a rapier, pierced the sphere with the sword. As if a long cry of despair could be heard from far, far away, and tiny droplets quickly began to separate from the sphere, immediately absorbed into the sword. No, no, no. Only destruction. I tried to put a volitional effort into the sword, and it worked. The sphere began to decompose, to rot. Rotting depressions and dents appeared on it until it was gone, along with a hushed cry of despair. However, a tiny number of droplets did soak in. Well, I don't think it's all that bad. My legs went limp, and the contact of my ass with the cold marble floor brought to me all the tension that I had experienced in the last minutes. When I looked around, there were no basilisks, just an empty room in the darkness. Nothing was happening or changing. I hope I don't have to destroy and devour every square inch here individually with my sword. Doesn't this hall symbolize the diadem? With a grunt, like a 100-year-old man, I got up off the floor and looked at one of the massive slabs, and without a second thought, I stabbed my sword into it. The slab scattered with glowing yellow sparks, beginning to accumulate on the blade of the sword. But the sparks did not absorb but froze in a tiny glowing dot as if waiting to continue. That won't do. A wild thought flashed through my head and demanded its immediate implementation. With a slight movement of my left hand, I wrapped a bloody film around one of the floor slabs, growing from this film a large elongated drop, as if hanging from the ceiling, but from the bottom up. And then I calmly pierced the drop. Inside, the bloody structure gleamed dully with tints of yellow sparks, which inside the drops reached for the sword but did not absorb into it, but only slightly increased the speck's size on the blade. Excellent! A volitional effort and a dark pool of blood quickly spread from me across the floor, covering every millimeter of the windowless and doorless room in a couple of seconds, and it took on a horrifying, not just frightening appearance. It was blood, after all. A drop of blood rose from the floor in front of me on a thin stalk, and I immediately pierced it with my sword. The blood on the hall surfaces glittered dully, and these glitters slowly flowed to the drop, to the sword. It was a mesmerizing picture. The stream of sparks became so dense that through the blood, contrary to all the laws of optics and opacity of blood, a bright monolithic stream of yellow light was seen, which formed a rapidly increasing stain on the sword blade. With the last spark, the speck of yellow light finally formed, blinked, and disappeared into the sword. A sharp and intense pain threw me to the floor. Just oceans of pain, somewhere inside, unclear where. Everywhere. I don't know what I was doing. I don't know how much time had passed. But the pain is gone. There was a darkness before my eyes, in which multicolored circles swam now and then, burning out from within, merging, changing shape. It didn't last long, and in a few seconds, I could see the mountains of junk in front of me. I was still kneeling on the floor, with a lot of ash on my shoulders and clothes. I ran my hand over my forehead, wiped off the large drops of sweat, and, along the way, smeared myself in the ashes. There was no pain, but my hands and legs shook from the overwork. Well, and everything else. I collapsed on my back without energy, and the only thought that came to me was to sleep. I must sleep. Chapter 118. It is difficult to wake up in constant light conditions and other external factors. You simply do not know how long you slept, what day it is, and what is going on. However, as soon as I got to my feet and dusted myself off, I realized that I slept for a day. I pulled out my wand and conjured Tempest. 1 o'clock in the morning. So the students are coming today. I had a couple of household spells to tidy myself up, cleaned myself, washed my face with the same method, and freshened myself up. I don't like hiking hygiene, it dries me up, but the feeling of the same unwashed head is much worse. I gathered my junk in the form of an unchangeable bag, put on a complex of concealing charms, and left the room of requirement and went to the Chamber of Secrets. Too many secret rooms in this castle, though. Should I make my own? Why not? I'll figure out exactly how to achieve something like that later. My stomach rumbled on the way, forcing me to turn into the kitchen. The house elves didn't seem to need much sleep at all, and they were happy to feed me. But after a hearty dinner, I absolutely lost the desire to go somewhere. Eventually, I reached the common room, which was empty and boring. I took a chair by the fireplace, transfigured the poof, threw my legs on it, and took a notebook and a pen out of my bag. I threw yellow lumos over my head with my wand, adjusting the color with a desire, and why does no one focus on such a possibility, and how did I know that Voldemort the Dark Lord is a fan of colored lumos? How lovely! I need to see if my calculating skills have improved, because that was the main point of the whole thing. Okay. Let's run through the arithmancy. As soon as my gaze fell on the equation and began to read it, my mind began to calculate it quite briskly. Not like I was used to, thinking in words or images, my brain simply began to operate on the knowledge of the material. Well, for example, I know the multiplication table and want to multiply 6 by 7. Usually, I unconsciously mentally say, 6 times 7. Or I add visualization to that as well. But now I just write the result at a glance, and I know for sure that the calculation has gone through, and I understand how, but too quickly. That's about how it was with the arithmetic equations, running my eyes over it. My consciousness or subconsciousness was able to quickly calculate it, and I had no problem considering each step of the solution separately. I decided to complicate the task and remembered higher mathematics. But I did not remember any specific equations, so I decided to invent them, combining systems, matrices, integrals, trigonometric functions. In general, to make a complete mess. But I gave up halfway through. I was solving equations as I was making them up, and I considered dozens of development scenarios depending on the next component. That's crazy. I decided to check my spatial thinking. Even in my previous life, I noticed a rigid and very strong dependence of consciousness on subconsciousness. It is enough to imagine a two-dimensional man made of sticks, even thick sticks. Now, when you have imagined it from the side, mentally make the man do a backflip, but so that the man lands strictly vertically on his feet. The fall of the man in the imagination is absolutely irreversible. The subconscious mind automatically calculates the shift of the center of mass, inertia, gravity, and a bunch of other parameters, up to the average mass and density of the abstract man. Making the man land strictly vertically and not fall down is a simple task, but it requires concentration and control. But if you don't make him do such a trick and land normally, bending forward at a slight angle, then the subconscious will straighten him by itself in the end. I easily ignored my subconscious mind in my mental experiment and stuck the little man strictly upright. The next mental experiment was the rotation of a three-dimensional figure. A ball, a pyramid with 3 or 4 sides, a cube, no problem at all. I can spin it any way I want. But if there are more than 6 sides, and, God forbid, they are not of the same configuration, the brain will instantly turn the rotation into a rather chaotic transformation, a simple lack of either experience or control over brain resources. What was my surprise when I was spinning in my mind a full Renee of 60 atoms as if it were a computer, not a brain in my head. Not a single moment of concentration, a clear representation of each atom in the form of a separate sphere and purely symbolic connections between them. Let's complicate the experiment. Let's take the structure of the spell from the grimoire, and make it more complicated. The most complicated one is desolation. It's like a fiend fire, but omnidirectional and visually similar to Patronus pulse. Well, only dark purple and literally scatters not very dense organic matter into atoms. The connection break is extremely brief but sufficient to make everything but the bones crumble into incomprehensible mush. This scheme is very complicated, consisting of a huge number of figures, lines, and symbols. Interesting, by the way. Once again, I notice that the grimoire spells have a different creation and activation principle than the local ones, but I digress. The scheme of desolation clearly appeared in my mind, but that's not surprising, all of the grimoire's spells are permanently imprinted in my mind. What was surprising was that the scheme didn't fall apart when I tried to change it a bit, it usually does. I spun it as I pleased, though I had no idea what I was doing. Knowledge is needed here. Holy shit! I exhaled without my input, amazed at the degree of optimization in my thinking. However, my head hurt a little and judging by the sensations in my neck and nape, my blood pressure spiked. It turns out that although the optimization of thinking has been successful, it has become a capacity of the mind, which is stored in the soul. But the mind works through the body, and that's what's failing now. Now I understand why Rowena, though she became one of the most famous witches and perhaps the best in the field of charms and other manipulations that require clear calculation and spatial thinking, still was not a super witch. Chapter 119. Despite the night time, I went to Madame Pomfrey's medical wing. On the way, I met Professor McGonagall. Despite the vacations and only a couple of people in the castle, the professors were still on patrol. "Good night, Professor," I nodded. "Mr. Knight," she looked sternly over her glasses. "Let me ask you, what are you doing in the hallways at night?" "I have a terrible headache. So I thought I'd go to Madame Pomfrey for a potion. I can't sleep, and I don't want to break my sleep pattern." "I understand. But I'll ask you not to break the rules in the future. Now I'll escort you to the hospital wing and back to the house common room." "Okay." Silently and without many words, we quickly made our way to the fiefdom of our healer, where Madame Pomfrey handed me 2 small vials of potions without ranting and escorted me away so as not to disturb my sleep before the upcoming semester. I drank the painkillers right away, and the sleeping pills should be drunk already in bed so as not to fall asleep somewhere in the corridors of the castle. There were 2 snoring bodies in the room, and judging by the fact that they were snoring on the floor and in their usual clothes. Some notes and diagrams were lying next to them as if they were making an insidious plan, just like in a detective story. As I got closer, I looked at the notes. The main message was why Max Knight was the Death Eater's son. "Oh, young detectives, if you'd just ask the older ones who go out." "Oh, yeah, they're not really friends with anyone except the rest of the Weasley family." "Well, let them investigate themselves. What can I do? My origin is an open secret." I changed my clothes, drank a sleeping pill, and passed out safely. As they say, I just blinked, it's already morning. This time the same thing happened. I woke up and stretched, and out of the corner of my eye, I noticed that the boys had rolled over a little to the other side of the floor. It was still early. It was not a heroic thing to get up, of course. As always, exercise, jogging, practice, shower, breakfast. The students would not arrive until evening, but in the Great Hall, the tables were already standing, as they should be, in 4 rows according to the houses. Taking a seat at the Gryffindor table, I noted again the surprising unanimity of the few students who remained in the castle. They were somewhere but not here. Okay, a couple of upperclassmen from Hufflepuff are understandable, 2 steps, and you'll find yourself in the kitchen. But Ravenclaws, oh, yeah. They like to stay in their books unless there's an emergency, just like me. After greeting the teachers with a nod, I could not help but notice Lupin. I didn't follow him much. I wasn't really watching him at all. I heard, however, that after that unfortunate full moon, Lupin had been admitted to the hospital wing with a bunch of stab wounds that wouldn't close properly. There is a chance that it was he who was that werewolf, but I will check by blood later. If I can't get rid of the lycanthropy, God forbid, I'll kill him. And if I succeed, I'll just cripple him badly. For memory prevention. After breakfast, I went straight to the library and asked Madame Pants for a list of books on the subject of spells and rituals. I was surprised that the librarian didn't object. She didn't say much about werewolves, though. Maybe a note of permission to the restricted section, signed by Dumbledore himself. Has such an effect when I got a list of 23 different books and folios, only 3 of which are in the restricted section. I went in search of them. Thanks to Madame Pants's list, where the books were lined up by degree of complexity and approach to creating and calculating spells, I didn't have to sort through the books, and I started exploring right away. Trouble came where I didn't expect it. The diadem effect doesn't turn off. Simply put, any conscious attempt to understand, calculate, or imagine something is automatically processed according to an optimized scheme. It would seem that it would be a sin to complain, but after half an hour, I had another headache. I decided to try to use hemamancy amplification simultaneously, as it improved my brain's abilities. I was able to sit quietly for 5 minutes with full amplification and got rid of all the symptoms of overstressing under the effect of the diadem. But now I was a little hungry, and I had eaten only recently. It looks like I need to work in the kitchen. I decided to start by memorizing the books without thinking, am I capable of doing that? I am. And so, after a quick run to the kitchen and a snack, I returned to the library and began to memorize the contents of the books frantically. I will think about their content later. In this state, the diadem's effect was practically uninvolved, only enhancing the already good memory. By the way, I needed to strengthen my nervous system less and less to achieve the effect of perfect memory. Does the process of body adaptation and amplification over 3 years have an effect? Chapter 120. I spent the rest of the evening quietly memorizing everything, just leafing through books. From the outside, it might seem like I'm just wasting my time. Perhaps it is so. Maybe I should go to someone more knowledgeable, and if I were Harry Potter, I'd already be standing in front of Dumbledore's desk. What's the point, though? I bet I'd be told something like, "Harry, my boy, I'm well aware that you've been through a difficult ordeal. It's not easy for any of us, and we'll get through it together. I can't help you now, unfortunately, but I can promise you that I will gather the necessary information, prepare myself, and I will be sure to tell you when the time comes. For now, go home to Privet Drive, the full moon is coming soon." Hee hee. Thoughts like that made me smile inadvertently. "Mr. Knight," Madame Pance's voice distracted me from my books, and I turned around at the sound. "Yes. In just a few minutes, the students will be arriving, and the new semester's feast will begin. Thanks for reminding me." "You're welcome." Putting the books in their places delayed me a bit, and so when I approached the Great Hall, the other students were already gathered there, just enough time for them to leave their outerwear in the common rooms and their rooms. Hermione stepped out of the crowd and was immediately beside me. "Hi," the girl smiled, giving me an immediate hug. I couldn't help but smile and reply, "Hi. How was your vacation?" "Just great. Let's hurry up and go to the hall. Honestly, I'm hungry. You can't imagine how much." The students who had arrived from vacation were expressing their happiness in every way possible because there were no Dementors. Noise and happy faces everywhere. Everyone talked about some story that had happened to them over the vacations or how they'd spent the holiday with their relatives. Even the Slytherins, always strict about themselves and their table manners, were much more open. And in the heat of brainstorming, I didn't even notice how those necromonsters flew back to Azkaban. "Max, you have no idea how glad I am," Hermione smiled as she put all sorts of meat on her plate. "Yet I love meat too, and I'm keeping up with my friend's portion size." "Of course," Hermione nodded confidently and with a smile. "Don't you feel it's even easier to breathe when the Dementors aren't around? Now we can study and train without any problems." "You did it without any problem with the Dementors, too. Even with more enthusiasm." "That's not it," Hermione chewed on a piece of chop. "Previously, it was as if from despair. No enthusiasm. It's different, and the results are a little different too. I can't argue with that." After satisfying the first hunger, we slowed down and ate more measuredly, leaving pauses for conversation. An hour was allotted for this feast anyway. "Why don't you tell me what happened at Hogwarts while I was gone?" "Well, I don't know all the details, but after Christmas, there was a terrible panic. From what I understand, Black snuck back into the castle. But, apparently, I waved my hand in the air, this problem was solved on its own, and the next morning the headmaster said that Black, it turns out, didn't need Harry at all. Also, he had nothing to do with any Hogwarts student or professor. He had his own business here. Even so, it's generally better to discuss this in a quiet environment." We were sitting next to each other, and no one cared about our conversations, so if quietly, we could But not about everything. Got it. Listen, why are Ron and Harry looking suspiciously in our direction? I'd even say at you. Well, you know my parents, right? Oh, I see. As the feast came to an end, Dumbledore took the floor and congratulated everyone on the successful resolution of the situation regarding Black and the departure of the Dementors back to Azkaban. Good luck with your studies, and go to your beds. Nothing new, really. For almost the first time this school year, the senior courses decided to throw a party in the common room, having managed to change into looser clothes, so to speak, not according to the dress code. Not without the help of the twins who brought in the contraband. Hermione and I settled down on our couch, which no one ever pays attention to. Third-year students are no longer chased to their bedrooms at bedtime. The others were enjoying the absence of mental pressure, sipping butterbeer, bragging about the joking spells they'd learned, conjuring up various vivid special effects. The twins were handing out all kinds of incomprehensible sweets that did all kinds of transformative, color-changing nonsense to their students without any consequences. Hermione took her wand out of the sleeve of her robe and waved it briefly, whispering a spell with just her lips. The air around us seemed to float for a second, and everything went back to normal, only the sounds were a little muffled and as if underwater. Tell me, she turned to me half-turned. Chapter 121. Well, what's there to tell? According to the information I know, Sirius Black turned out to be innocent of the crimes he was charged with. Peter Pettigrew appeared to have faked his own death. Do you remember what Black was accused of? Of betraying the Potter family and giving their hiding place to the Dark Lord. Everyone knows that in general. Yes. As I understand it, the hiding place was under Fidelius's charms, and Black wasn't the secret keeper at all. A dramatic pause forced Hermione only to arch an eyebrow in anticipation of the continuation. Peter Pettigrew. He was the secret keeper. He was the one who gave it away. Strange things, I must admit, Hermione pondered. There's no record of the trial, and I have nothing to say, but couldn't the Veritaserum have been used? I don't know anything either. It's just. That's the way it is. I see. Tell me, Max, why do you suddenly need literature on lycanthropy? Oh, that's a separate topic. Did you know that Lupin is a werewolf? Professor Lupin. I guessed, Hermione nodded. And you didn't even share your guesses. I should have gathered more information. Statistics. His strange illness coincided very well with the full moons. On the day of the full moon and the day after, he didn't attend classes or meals. You probably don't know it, but Professor Lupin successfully taught a class with a boggart in the Hufflepuff Ravenclaw group. One girl's boggart took the form of a scary Jack-in-the-Box. Judging from the stories, it was really scary, and the girl almost fainted. She was shielded from the boggart by the professor, and the boggart immediately took the form of the moon from behind the clouds. Well, someone said it was a piece of cheese and flakes of dust, but that's even harder to believe. Such information made me scratch the back of my head thoughtfully. And why didn't I know about something like this? You just need to communicate with someone else besides me. I'm certainly not eager to listen to a pile of gossip at night in my room with the girls, but who's going to ask me? And ours just snore and spew nonsense. Boys, the girl sniggered. I thought you were in some kind of trouble. Like that time last year. Of course, I did. How could you think otherwise? You didn't get into anything, did you? Hermione looked intently into my eyes. So intently that if it weren't for the calmness of my mental defenses, she might have been suspected of legilimens. I don't think so. What? You seem to have an overly honest look. What are you two cooing about? The twin voice of the twins sounded behind us, but neither for Hermione nor for me, they came as a surprise. I heard them approaching, and Hermione, as the owner of the set muting charms, should have felt the crossing of their border. Well, I turned to the smiling red-headed brothers, as did Hermione. Speculating. trying to find out from Max if he got himself in trouble while I was gone. Wow, Brother Fred. Yes, Brother George. Don't you think that in the near future? Maybe not in the near. And not in the future. But already. Yeah. Yeah. We're going to have a new couple. They shouted together, clapping their hands, spreading some glitter around. However, both Hermione and I immediately swished our wands briefly, making the glitter disappear before it touched us. Brother Fred, one twin looked at the other with ostentatious dejection and resentment. Yes, Brother George. They don't trust us. They don't trust at all. Oh, as if there was no reason at all, I smirked back. That's right, Hermione nodded in agreement. I don't know what you've got mixed up in your pollen. Pollen, both twins were surprised. That's a great name. We'll just have to combine it. Let's go quickly. And they left. Gestures, Hermione snapped back without malice, turning her gaze on the merry Gryffindors all over the common room. I, on the other hand, became thoughtful. Until this moment, I'd never considered Hermione, or anyone at Hogwarts, from this perspective. And the hormones have been going around since last year, but for someone who's been through this stage of growing up, such chemical upheavals of their own body are nothing new, and that's the first reason. It was strange and incomprehensible in my previous life. You wanted something, but you didn't know what it was, so you rushed back and forth. Now I know very well what these are. Those reactions of the body are connected with, what they lead to, and, in general, there is no secret of relations in the horizontal plane for me, and I can hardly be surprised in this matter. However, I have not considered anybody, and the second reason for that is simple. Well, they're still children. And not even in terms of physical development, the 6th, 7th graders are already quite mature. It's about the mental aspect. I remember all those awkward adolescent attempts to be with someone, hand in hand, embarrassing glances, all sorts of awkward moments, fear of rejection, excitement and stupor from not knowing how to act, shy kisses. When it was all just starting out, and you had no idea where it was supposed to lead, and the biology textbook only made it more complicated. The guys in the yard say different things, but in reality, I'm not sure I want and can relive those embarrassing and very memorable moments again. Also, I didn't love anyone. My relatives don't count, it's different there. I didn't love anyone as a woman, it just so happened. Youthful attractions, of course, but love, what is love anyway? Not like a chemical reaction, which is an attraction, but, as Dagworth Granger said in his work on potions, the unwavering, unchanging, unconditional devotion and loyalty that only love can be called. Chapter 122. If you look at the local witches in terms of beauty, there are many beautiful ones. Seriously, there are a lot of them. At one time, I have come across such opuses about the connection between the British's appearance and the fact that in the Middle Ages, they themselves eradicated all beauty, burning witches at the stake of the Inquisition. And the fact of living on an island could not but affect, closed society and everything. However, when it comes to wizards, we should not forget that it is extremely difficult to drive one of us to the bonfire. Even a simple accidental wandless magic under the influence of strong emotions can radically change the situation in favor of the wizard. There have been cases, for sure. There were also cases of betrayal by Muggleborns that left after Hogwarts in the Church's bosom. Closely related marriages, is also the one more story. First of all, many pure-blood families didn't originate in England. Malfoy, Rosier, Folly, Greengrass, Crouch, Shafik, and that's just of the sacred 28. There aren't that many truly insular ones. Black and Weasley are among them, by the way. The second important factor is magic. Take at least the ritual that Malfoy performed. I'm not sure what other adjustments wizards can make because I haven't studied everything yet, and the library at Grimmauld has only been explored at the public section level, and there's nothing of value there. Damn, the twins are assholes. They brought up a topic that I hadn't thought about at all. What? Hermione looked at me. She will definitely grow up beautiful. Well, I think I'm in trouble. What's wrong? The twins prompted different thoughts. What kind of thoughts? Different. I waved my hand in the air. That's it. The face is kept normal, a clemency helps, but the blush betrays me. I feel like saying something in a Ron Weasley style from the canon, that's Hermione. Our friend. The conversation stalled on its own. And what do you think of their sudden line about us? What do I think? Well, we came to Hogwarts to study. And you yourself said that you wanted to take full advantage of these 7 years in order to leave Hogwarts not as a mediocre one but as a wizard whose opinion would be listened to. And you recommended me to do the same. I was stunned by this. Did you just quote me? Yes. Okay. So, what do you think? Now let's check it out in a radical but harmless way. Quickly turning my back on Hermione and simply lying down, resting my head at her feet. Max. With a mixture of embarrassment and righteous indignation, Hermione looked down at me. It's a science experiment. I raised my finger to the sky. If you don't know what to think, provoke those thoughts. Provoke the thoughts, so. Yet. What do you think? That I want to put my arms around your neck and strangle? Hermione really pulled her hands to my neck but stopped halfway. Or bang you with something heavy. Now, I'll just cover my eyes. And I did. And I wasn't even hit. Without waiting for the reprisal, I settled my head more comfortably, and with a wave of my wand, I changed the muffling spell slightly. Now the sounds of merriment outside seemed clearer, but as if farther away, creating just a quiet background. What am I doing in exactly 2 weeks? My life could change drastically into before and after. I have to study books, learn and understand a mountain of material, do calculations, and I'm just wasting my time. Hermione said it right, reminding me of my own words. I need to take full advantage of my time to get out of Hogwarts. To at least just get out of Hogwarts. The sudden and unexpected sensation of a stranger's hand in my hair was unusual and unaccustomed. The last time I'd felt something like this was in a previous life. What's wrong? Hermione asked quietly. And don't say nothing. It's written all over your face. I just took a deep breath. You don't trust me. The annoyance in her words was literally palpable. I trust you. But you won't tell. Without opening my eyes, I spoke quietly. We are in a world of magic. Here you can read minds, force people with a spell or a potion, or even that Verita serum. My secrets can hurt you. I've just invented a perfectly legal way to get any information out of a person. Amortentia. What Amortentia? How even the head stroking stopped for a moment, immediately becoming a little more animated. Talk about knowledge and information, Hermione would immediately become more active. You give a person Amortentia on yourself. Then he loses his head, as he should. And you're like, my dear, you will fulfill my request, won't you? And the victim will comply consciously. Everything, for love. Creepy stuff, and totally legitimate. Good thing it's not permanent and passes quickly. You think I don't recognize Amortentia if orange juice suddenly starts to smell like yet? Something else, that's a reason to think. My own. My secrets are dangerous. They're not Potter's secrets, the worst of which is that he's unhappy with his relatives and that he has holes in all his socks. The girl giggled quietly. It's serious here. By burdening you with a load of secrets, I will only expose you to danger, albeit ephemeral. Why do you need extra worries? What if I can help understand? I'm worried about you. I am flattered, of course, but... Here I thought again about who I could ask for help, and the image of Lady Walburga's portrait kept coming up before my closed eyes. I'll send a letter to Creaker to tell the portrait about the problem, and maybe she'll send me a book or some advice. Chapter 123. You know, my own. I could really need some help. The hand that had been stroking my head so nicely froze for a moment. What kind? I haven't figured it out yet, but I'll definitely figure it out tomorrow. By the way, how's our experiment going? Fruitful. Opening my eyes, I looked up at Hermione, who smiled. However, she pouted with seriousness in her voice. I think it's too early for us to be thinking about something like that. Yes, I think so myself. But in principle, can we think about it? Who knows? By the way, you almost had a Freudian slip of the tongue. What? I made a cocky smile. What did you say Amortentia smells like to you? I do not know anything. Hear it for the first time. And generally speaking, I was forcibly returned to a sitting position. It's time for bed, it's late, classes tomorrow, training. Gotta get some sleep. Okay, okay. Good night. Good night. Upon reaching the women's wing entrance, Hermione turned around for a brief moment and looked at me. Oh my god! That's it, the twin who appeared on my right said, sitting down next to me and throwing his arm over my shoulder. Yep, added the other, appearing on my left. Sailed, pretty boy, anchor dropped. No more freedom. What are you going to do? What do you want? The twins looked at each other. Our flighty brother Ronnie with the hero of all England. Are diligently trying to fit you under the term Death Eater's son. Well, let them indulge. What does it matter to me? You know, we're trying to start our own business. A joke shop. Even got a name for it. Weasley's Wizard Wheezes. The twins exclaimed together. Let's admit. And to be in business, you must have connections. So we know everyone. Who can pay? By the faces, what's your point? You're Foster, aren't you? The right one asked. I nodded. And it looks like we know who your parents are. Starts with M. Ends with an Oi. Even so. The twins looked at each other again. Really, brother Fred? Definitely, brother George. He doesn't know. Mate, the one on my left clapped me on the shoulder. We're not the ones who have to tell you this, but when Ronnie gets to the bottom of it. And sooner or later, it will happen. He'll be right. So. Just to let you know. He's a little hot-tempered and harsh in words. Just don't be offended. Can I just punch him in the face if he gets impudent? He's our brother, of course, but if he gets so insolent that MR nerd decides to punch him in the face, it's definitely something serious. That's a deal. I'm going to bed. Don't drink too much in case McGonagall stops by. I got up from the couch and went to my room. Stupid day, stupid twins. Stupid. Everything is stupid. The morning of the first day of the new semester began with a jog. Only this time, I was wearing an insulated uniform. I got out of Hogwarts under a cloaking spell and ran. At the same time, I mentally called out for Creaker. Only after running almost a mile and a half away from the castle toward the Hogsmeade platform did Creaker finally hear me, and with a characteristic clap, he appeared slightly to my right, immediately shuddering in the breeze with snowflakes rising. Creaker greets the head of the most ancient and noble House Black. The old house elf immediately oriented himself and bowed, shuddering in the cold breeze as he did so. The note had already been written for him, and the situation was laid out quite clearly, although there was no mention of changes in my soul. Read the note to Lady Walburga. Perhaps she will have some advice. I'll call you tomorrow with an answer. Critcher took the note, bowed, and operated back to Grimmauld while I ran to Hogwarts. After a shower and other hygienic measures, I sat down in the common room. Hermione was one of the first to come out and looked visibly sleep-deprived. She blushed a little at the sight of me but immediately got it under control. Good morning. Morning. With a wave of my wand, I created a silence spell around us. I have an idea how you can help me. We need to study something related to the soul trap. Soul trap? I've never heard of such a thing. It's a conventional name. I just made it up myself. Need to find out information about something capable of enclosing a soul for a short time. Why would you need such a thing? These directions are forbidden by the ministry, and we could be put in Azkaban for such a thing, for practicing necromancy without a license and guild membership. I can assure you that it is necessary for me. No one is going to catch the souls of the living. Wah! And we won't kill anyone either. That's not what I mean. Just don't get into any trouble yourself, and I'll look for it. After removing the spell from the area, we headed to breakfast and then to class. Chapter 124. The days flew by one. The classes went on as they should have, except that Snape was even stricter and obviously angry at everything around him, and Potter was getting the brunt of it. In the library, I continued to memorize books' contents on the creation of spells and rituals. At the same time, Hermione dug around in the restricted section, finding books there that might contain the necessary information. On the morning of the second day, I made my way outside the castle again and summoned Creaker. The news he brought was not particularly cheerful. If you omit all unflattering epithets about me, Dumbledore, Lupin, and every other adult wizard at Hogwarts, there wasn't much else to say. There were none of the blacks who were into necromancy and all kinds of manipulation with flesh. If I need materials on necromancy, Lady Walburga said I should go to Greengrass, but it wouldn't pay off. You will owe them both in life and in death, even if it wasn't for long. This information surprised me, but to each his own. Every family specializes in something. Why not in necromancy anyway? I returned to the castle with nothing. My friendship with Hermione hadn't changed one bit, but the tips of her ears sometimes blushed. On the one hand, it was good that in light of such ridiculous, but in some ways even sweet dialogue, we did not alienate each other, but on the other hand, do I need it? Harry and Ron had me under total surveillance, and it seemed that I had taken over the baton from Professor Snape in this regard. The pair of unfinished bonds were following me everywhere, but so ineptly that it only made me laugh. Every now and then, I could see a redhead and a bespectacled brunette sticking out of the corner. Maybe I should transfigure grey cloaks and hats for them a couple of times. This couple even tried to follow Hermione and me and get into our training sessions and even used the cloak of invisibility. Still, it didn't lessen the noise, and so they were exposed and deceived, and we left under the hiding spells. 7 days before the X hour, I finished memorizing all the material I needed, and Hermione found one of the soul catcher variants. A rather complicated amulet, similar to a dream catcher. You can make it out of anything, but the best ones are magical animal bones. And that's great. If animal bones are used, they must first be soaked in a simple potion. I ordered the ingredients for it from the twins. The ingredients didn't cost much, and the twins worked promptly for half a galleon. In a couple of hours, everything was delivered. In the evening of the same day, Hermione brewed the potion, and I brought some basilisk bones. We cut them into the necessary strips with a special spell and dipped them into the potion. It will be ready in 12 hours. I took the cauldron of soaking bones and hid them in the Chamber of Secrets. We cannot allow it to be accidentally discovered by someone else. And then, neglecting the magical training with Hermione and only being present while she was furiously beating transfigurable dummies with magic, I mentally realized the memorized information from books and folios. I was amplifying my brain with hemomancy to the maximum and eating every hour a medium-sized lunch. True, I had to constantly chase Timmy back and forth to the kitchen to do this, but the house elf only got happier and happier each time. On the evening of the 6 days before the X moment, I brought back a potion of bones from the Chamber of Secrets. They had gone from white to slightly red and could bend and crumple like twigs, though they didn't break. Hermione took over the weaving of the soul catcher. In fact, she insisted on it, referring to her childhood experience in the 15, she said, beautiful and complex dream catchers that had come out of her hands. Her parents had recommended doing something like that in her time to develop fine motor skills. They also insisted on playing the piano, but that's another story, so she said. In the evening of the same day, I finished with an awareness of the material I had learned, but it affected my overall health, even if just a little bit. I also never ate so much. 4 days were spent on calculations. I was so busy with them that I even slept for an hour at a time, wasting all my time on calculations, calculations, calculations. The essence of creating a spell or ritual is to translate into numbers the processes implied in that magical action. From the lesser to the greater. At first, I was in complete shock, not knowing what to approach. Still, as if guided by insights, I began to describe the essence of the process first with words, then with actions, and after receiving the most complete and detailed description of the ritual, I started to make the calculations. I don't know if it was the old man's will or some other way, but the ritual turned out very well and did exactly what I needed. Chapter 125. When creating a final graphic drawing of the ritual, if it is necessary, it is important to consider a significant factor, an order of activation of different elements of the drawing for the construction of the correct final magical influence. This can be achieved in different ways, but the essence of all is the same: to slow down, accelerate or stop a flow of magic in the drawing until certain conditions are met. Somewhere to accumulate, somewhere to dump the accumulated, somewhere to redirect. This is achieved by the thickness of the lines or other elements, special runes, or individual numbers or figures, the distance between the lines, their bends, bending angle, and other methods. Simply put, absolutely every squiggle, bend, or ratio of sizes and proportions matters. As for the final effect itself, my body must disintegrate into atoms, my soul captured by the trapper. The resulting mixture will dissolve the soul catcher and absorb the soul. For the process of recreating a body, magic is not enough, a sacrifice is needed. And according to the calculations, one must sacrifice a trophy that unequivocally represented death. Symbolism, as it follows from the calculations, also plays a role. I was not stingy and decided to use the remains of the basilisk's carcass and heart as a trophy. What could be more deadly? The day before the full moon, I began to feel weak and ill, and the question of whether I had lycanthropy disappeared on its own. I was in the same condition as Lupin, but at least I could hide my lethargy and pallor behind the hemomancy enhancement, but our Hogwarts werewolf looked really bad if you know what to look for. It took another day to check and recalculate all the developments, and after class, the evening before the night of the full moon, I could go about my dark business. I was in a really shitty state, as if I had a major illness. Why as if the way it is? I checked to make sure I had everything I needed, put on some warm clothes, and went out of the room into the common room. The noise of those rabid teenagers gave me a headache. Max, a worried Hermione came up to me. Are you sure you don't need help? Maybe the hospital wing? No, my own. Madame Pomfrey won't help here. Won't help. Max. I don't know how women do it, but she whispered, almost screaming. She wanted to say something else, but when she saw another burst of laughter make me cringe, she pulled me out of the common room. It wasn't until we were in the hallway and the portrait was slammed shut that Hermione conjured up the silencing charms around us. Max. You have the same condition as Professor Lupin. I had nothing to say, and I'm not going to lie. Don't tell me. Oh, Merlin. The girl threw up her hands. But he's drinking the potion, I know for a fact. Professor Snape makes it for him. I only grinned. Do I look that bad? You look like a corpse. Skin whiter than snow, bruises under your eyes, both eyes twitching. Look. She grabbed my hand and lifted it to chest level. Shaking. Tremors of the limbs. I might not have given it much thought, but we were talking about lycanthropy the other day. I don't even know if it's a good thing you're so smart or a bad thing. We need to do something urgently. Professor Snape. No. I was surprised at the severity in my voice myself. No, Hermione. I've been preparing for this day. Preparing what? Hermione was silent and frozen for a few moments. Soul Catcher, Necromancy, Vitaministerium. Have you read the work of a priestess? I can see it in your eyes. And have you read it? Of course. It's on my side. Hermione took a deep breath, closed her eyes. Maximilian Knight. The girl poked me accusingly in the chest with her finger. You. She poked again. She looks dangerous. A couple of unruly strands had broken out of the incomprehensible hairstyle on the back of her head. Yes, indeed, she will grow beautiful. You're the most. Her voice got a little quieter. The craziest Gryffindor among all Gryffindors. I just don't have the proper words to describe the depth of your madness. Dementia. You think you can get rid of lycanthropy by being reborn? It's magic, Hermione. I don't see any other way. Chapter 126. Hermione took a couple of deep breaths. Hermione. Seriously. This is a chance. It's a real chance. If it doesn't work out and I stay a werewolf, we'll find another way. But if I give up and get scared and miss the moment before the first transformation, what if it works? By the calculations, it should work out. I don't know where you are going to perform this no doubt insane ritual, but I'm coming with you and don't even think about arguing. Do you have the notes with you? You did compile your ritual, didn't you? Yes. I'll double check it. If it makes you feel any better, go put some warm clothes on. You won't run away. No. Hermione said the password and hid behind the portrait, and I really waited. Let's open some cards and see what comes out of it. In fact, she should be proficient enough in occlumency to avoid superficial mind scanning, and an average level won't save her from purposeful legilimens with her wand from the likes of Snape or Dumbledore. Nor should an advanced one. You have to be an expert here. At least that's the impression you get of their abilities from their knowledge of the canon. And who else is capable of something like that? The art of legilimency may and is considered dark, but I have long understood the simple truth of this world. Not caught, not a thief. It took the girl only a couple of minutes to change into warm pants, a sweater, and a jacket and scarf. I'm going to hide us from prying ears and eyes. Give me your hand. Taking the girl's hand, I immediately experienced her iron grip. I took out my wand, cast a set of cloaking spells on us in quick motions, and walked quickly toward the Chamber of Secrets. The women's toilet. The charms did not conceal the voice. Really? I didn't even realize how strange it felt to have the source of the voice in front of you, but you couldn't see it. It's more than just a toilet. Of course, it's more than that. After all, Moaning Myrtle lives here. I hope she's not here now. Who knows? I led us to a circle of sinks. Open up SSSSSS. I see it's a day of great mysteries. There was no fear in Hermione's voice but plenty of sarcasm. I hope you're not afraid to get a little dirty. I'm afraid of getting into Azkaban, Max. I highly doubt I'll get my sentence reduced for a clean robe. Excellent. Me first, you follow me. That's how it's going to be at the trial. After removing our charms so we could see each other, I jumped into the passageway and made it safely to the hall with the bones, which was steadily in semi-darkness. For the umpteenth time, I was glad that this winding pipe was polished to mirror-like smoothness by whomever. The approaching girlish squeal tore me out of my thoughts about the smoothness of the pipe, and stepping back a step, put my hands forward. Hermione squealed and flew out of the pipe, but I intercepted her. There, sprawled in my arms, the girl looked me in the eye with indignation. Under different circumstances, I might have enjoyed the moment. That's mutual. I swayed with sharp but short-lived dizziness, and Hermione hurriedly jumped out of my arms and immediately backed me up. It's okay, I nodded. Let's move on. Before I went any further, however, I walked up to the pipe and yelled "Shut up" in Parseltongue. Judging by the distinctive sound, the passage closed. Now, after conjuring a couple of regular lumos, I led the girl further through the dungeons. Pretty quickly, we reached the memorable cave-in, where Lockhart had foolishly used Weasley's wand. And here's where Lockhart deprived himself of his memory, I nodded at the cave-in. And broke the ceiling. It's a miracle no one died. Oh. Hermione was clearly absorbing the information. Perhaps later, she will remind me of this hike. Again. When I reached the big round door with the snakes, I had to speak Parseltongue again. If I had more strength and felt better, maybe I would have smiled at Hermione, who flinched at the sharp thud of the opening locks. When the round and the massive door slid aside, I led the girl into the very hall. It was still gloomy and cold, and the unknown sources of dim light under the ceiling allowed me to see only minor details, the remains of the destruction from the battle and the carcass of a basilisk with a severed head that has not yet begun to spoil. It looked as if it had just been killed and butchered. Chapter 127. Hermione looked stunned, staring at the animal corpse in disbelief, but showed no squeamishness as we got closer. You killed that? She pointed her finger at the carcass in a completely uncivilized way. There wasn't much choice in the matter. It's the size of a train. No, it's smaller. Okay, Hermione. There's no time. Here are all the records. Here's your soul catcher. You check, and I'll prepare the materials. I took the soul catcher and notebook with notes out of my bag and handed them to the girl. Good. I began using my wand and various spells to clean up around the room, clearing away the crumbs and dust left over from the battle. After clearing most of the room, I found an undamaged spot in the middle of the room. There's plenty of room, and the ritual's graphic layout is 5 meters in diameter. The magically active ingredient for the drawing is my diluted blood and basilisk blood. It's interesting, though, that its heart and nearby vessels had more than 40 liters of perfectly normal, not clotted blood in them during the cutting. Wonderful creature, the basilisk. I dropped the bag on the floor and started pulling out everything I needed: jars of blood, a large neutral mixing pot, heart. It was gigantic in size, by the way. I mean, practically as big as me. Knowingly bought a bag with an elongated neck. I was 1,000,000% sure about the calculations of the ritual. There were doubts: who could have whispered revelations to me? Absorbed parts of Voldemort, a diadem, who knows? But after checking everything 50 times, I was sure it was right. I went back to Hermione, who was diligently reading my notes under the light of the lumos, sat down beside her, and waited. Seems right, she spoke, but clearly hadn't finished checking yet. It's hard without a calculator. How did you even calculate all this so quickly? It takes at least a couple of weeks to work out just the idea itself. And then there are the calculations, the translations, the adaptation to the position of the stars, the calculations again. How? If I tell you, you'll just kill me, so you don't have to worry anymore. I found the strength to smile. Max, I get it. In the near future, I will thoroughly deal with occlumency, and soon you will tell me everything. It's simply impossible to be tormented by ignorance and worries, imagining how you get involved in one misfortune worse than another. Hermione. Time. I have a diagram to draw, and the full moon is in an hour. Max, the girl looked at me very concerned. Do you realize how much of a risk you're taking? Absolutely. Aren't you afraid of dying? We will all be there. How we face death depends on us, and I definitely will not be a werewolf. But what if I was wrong about the soul catcher weave then? You're not wrong, and I am sure of that too. I double-checked her work. The girl only sighed and closed her notebook, and handed me the soul catcher, which I immediately put around my neck as an amulet. Everything is fine. Nodding, I stood up and walked into the center of my chosen spot. The drawing of the ritual was in my mind, and all the calculations were lined up for the time 5 minutes before the full moon. With the power of diadem, I projected the scheme around me, waved my wand, and ran it along my palm, releasing some blood and forming a small orb. With a gesture, I sent it into a large neutral cauldron. With a new gesture, I made the basilisk blood from the jars overflow into the cauldron, and with another gesture, stirred it. A new wave of the wand and all the blood from the cauldron rushed in trickles upwards, circling over me. The crucial stage was to carve the ritual pattern into the floor with the blood while laying the blood in the carved scheme and channeling a bit of magic into it to fix the scheme. The scheme itself is so damn complicated. From the abundance of elements, lines, figures, runes, and signs of various shapes and thicknesses, it dazzles in the eyes, but it's calibrated to perfection. Will I ever stop reassuring myself, or not? The process went on slowly and surely. Slow. Too slow, but rushing was unacceptable. From the corner of my eye, I noted Hermione standing off to the side, clearly nervous, rubbing the sleeves of her warm sweater sticking out from under her jacket. By the time I was done with the diagram, I could distinctly feel the full moon approaching. The minutes were counting. I grabbed the tip of the basilisk's tail with my telekinesis through my wand, pumped a lot of magic into the manipulation, and dragged it to the area of the circle reserved for my sacrifice. I moved the enormous heart to the same section, just enough to take up all the space. Tempus. 6 minutes to the full moon. I ran a glance over the drawing, made sure it was free of debris and other unwanted elements and looked at Hermione. I don't think you want to see that, and I'll have to take my clothes off, too. Let me figure out for myself what I want to see and what I don't. I hope the process of disintegrating my body wouldn't become your boggart. But, I warned you. Quickly I began shedding my clothes, levitating them outside the circle. It was rather amusing to note from the corner of my eye the slightly crimson face of a girl who didn't know where to look and then the momentarily pale one. Well, yes, I seem to be a handsome boy. Muscles and stuff like that, and then bang. Scars all over the right side, as if I had escaped from the jaws of a shark. Horrible. Yet I grinned with a questioning eyebrow. I thought better of myself. I mean the scars. Did Professor Lupin really do that? They say werewolves don't remember what happens when they transform, then why doesn't he look me in the eye or at me anymore? Chapter 128. The time for talking came to an end, and I got rid of the last piece of clothing in time. It was at that moment that the ritual was activated. I had intentionally created it to be fully automated in case I was incapacitated at that moment. I did it as a precaution, so to speak. The red-blooded drawing began to glow, and flashes of varying brightness and saturation raced through it from side to side. The concentration of magic in the pattern was growing, and I could feel it in every fiber of my being because some of it was taking from me, and some of it was draining the basilisk's body and heart. The sacrifice of the flesh is the reason why no one likes the masters who work with it. Also, if this flesh is something valuable directly for the master, has some sacred meaning, then you can get the ocean of magic by this sacrifice and not puff, producing it yourself. When I clearly began to feel the body's urges to transform, a translucent energy bowl like a half-sphere of protogo appeared beneath me, and it would be what was left of me. Sharp pain and then darkness. How long have I been here? An hour, a year. Again the pain, and with it came the sensation of being very large, but extremely low density. A brief moment, and it was as if I was squeezed, compressed, shaped. My hearing and sense of smell returned, and light flashed in my eyes, starting to disappear at once. The stone floor felt pleasantly cold on my bare feet. The body felt quite normal, and the eyes quickly adapted to the darkness of the Chamber of Secrets. Step. Not very dexterous, I almost lost my equilibrium, but I quickly caught my balance and took the second step with much more confidence. I couldn't help but run my hands along my head, parodying the cinematic rebirth of one Dark Lord. Even the hair is there, the same touch as before. With a wave of my hand, I summoned my robe and put it on, and with the other hand, I summoned my wand and looked around. Hermione was standing nearby, but she looked disheveled and crimson. Did something happen? I asked, approaching her. Other than your death, the disintegration into bloody soup, and resurrection from a cloud of black and red smoke. Did it look like that? That's not what matters. She burst out. Here, look. The girl pointed a little to the side with her hand. When I turned my gaze to the indicated spot, I could hardly refrain from a series of coarse swear words. A little further away on the floor were none other than Ron and Harry, securely bound by Encarcero and clearly gagged by Silencio, judging by their moving mouths. The boys were under a strong impression, and the invisible cloak was lying beside them. And what to do with them? Asked Hermione dejectedly. What a surprise! Ha ha ha! A woman's tinkling laughter echoed in my head, driving me into a wild stupor. Who the hell is that laughing in my head? What a funny boy! Ha ha ha! The woman continued to laugh, which made both my eyes twitch. How to break my diadem? He can do that. What kind of joke is that? How did this relic of the past end up in my head, Max? Are you even here? I looked at Hermione, at the ceiling above my head, at the guys, at Hermione again, at the burned out ritual diagram and the remaining third of the basilisk carcass not claimed by the ritual. World! What evil thing have I done to you? Max! Hermione rubbed the sleeve of my robe. Shit! I hate Horcruxes. The dimly lit hall of the gloomy Slytherin Chamber of Secrets, as well as the cold of the dungeons, were not conducive to long and complicated thinking exertions. Neither did the two bewildered human larvae. Ron and Harry, tightly bound by the Encarcero spell, are actively wriggling on the floor. Nor was the woman's voice in my head a good source of reflection. I was just tired of the whole thing. I headed for the pile of clothes I'd piled outside the ritual pattern etched into the stone floor. Max! Hermione called out to me. What do we do? I don't know yet. Personally, I'm going to get dressed now. Hermione looked away this time. Curiously enough, I hadn't taken off the black's ring, and it was still on my finger. Magic, Max? The scars were still there, but they were less visible, not that the ritual had helped. Surely there must be some level of influence on my body, my soul, or something like that that I don't yet know or understand. Of course there is, came the woman's voice in my head again, which I decided to ignore. Funny boy. I adjusted the edges of my winter robe and swiped my wand in a wide arc, pumping more magic into the reparo, removing any trace of the ritual, not wanting to waste precious psychic resources on wordless and nonverbal witchcraft at all right now. The drawing in the stone was literally overgrown like a wound, and I walked toward the frozen boys. That discouragement was no longer read in their gaze, but a certain hostility and wariness were present in abundance. Chapter 129. For a few seconds, I tried to think of some way to resolve the obvious conflict, but there isn't one, really. The pair of them think I'm a Death Eater's son like Malfoy. In their opinion, I probably fell into the evil dark wizard category and got into Gryffindor by obviously cheating on my hat, so sneaky was I. Now I'm not sure that the easy way is the best, but I just don't have an ounce of desire to mess with it all. Smoothly but quickly, raising my wand, I threw Somnus at each of them. You got something on your mind? Obliviate. It could hurt them. Hermione was clearly unhappy with that decision. Confuse and insinuate that their hike was a dream. Take them back to the common room, and that's it. Their minds will smear the memory thinly over the mental, and when they wake up, they'll forget it themselves. The desire to resent the invisible interlocutor's unsolicited advice disappeared as quickly as it had appeared. I really didn't want to be bothered with all this. The joy of the ritual was irrevocably overshadowed by the voice in my head and this couple. I was sick of the whole thing. There is another option, I replied to Hermione and pointed my wand at Ron, formulating a mental instruction. Confuse. Repeated the same action with Harry, cast stasis on the boys, and turned them into figurines. What kind of spell was that? Immediately perked up Hermione, even though she was a little worried about the two knuckleheads. Harmless. Confuse made them think that they were just dreaming about going to the Chamber of Secrets. Let's bring them back to the common room and put them at the table where they play chess all the time. Good idea. How did I not think of it myself? Quickly putting the empty flasks and other supplies together with the figurines in a bag, we headed for the exit from the Chamber of Secrets. Already in the hall with the floor of bones, Hermione asked a perfectly reasonable question. Max, how do we get out? A good question, I must say. The solution came to me pretty quickly. Taking off my bag and sitting down on one knee, I looked at the girl. Get on my back. I'll climb up the pipe with spider legs charms. That's a little embarrassing, Hermione blurted out a little. I can turn you into a figurine. No way. Hermione walked over decisively, picked up my bag, slung its strap over my shoulder, and wanted to put her arms around my neck, settling on my back, but I don't need that kind of challenge. Grab my shoulders with your hands from underneath, or better yet, just hold yourself up higher, and throw your hands over my shoulders, just not my neck. You'll strangle me. Yes, really. Trying to ignore the pleasant inconvenience, I concentrated on climbing up the terribly smooth pipe, hardly using any of my hemomancy amplification. However, to my delight, even without conscious amplification, the climb didn't even cause shortness of breath. The entrance to the Chamber of Secrets was open, but here I was not surprised. Potter is not, in my opinion, the most quick-witted young man. Why close a suspicious passageway in the ladies' room? Really, under the concealment spell, we quickly made our way to the Gryffindor common room, which was already empty. After checking the space around for anyone's presence and finding no hidden or overt observers, I quickly removed the boys' figurines from my bag and turned them back into humans. Levitating their sleeping bodies at a table with a chessboard and an unfinished game made them look as if the guys had simply fallen asleep at the table, waiting for something. Only after that Hermione and I wished each other good night, and the girl went to the women's wing. I left the common room again and went to the top of the astronomical tower. To my luck, I didn't meet any of the teachers on night duty and got to the tower without any problems. As soon as I opened the door and stepped outside, under the moonlight, something inside me gave me a jingle, and my body tensed a little as if a series of hot waves passed through me. I stopped like a stone and listened to my inner sensations, but nothing else happened. A minute, 2, 10. Nothing. Something had changed, but what was unclear. Make a mirror, boy. Shame and some anger flashed through my mind for a brief moment. The inviolability of my mind was in danger. However, my sanity prevailed. I could not get rid of the unknown lady in my head right now, but I could find out the extent of the full moon's influence. But I was planning, what could have gone wrong? Chapter 130. I took an empty vial out of my bag, transfigured it into a mirror, and examined myself. The first thing that stood out from my usual image was the vertical pupils. It was still the same blue eyes, and it seemed that the iris was even a little brighter, but the pupil was vertical and now rather wide open. I looked around and was surprised to find that my vision had improved, its sharpness, although no colors had been added, and the night was still not rich in color, even under the light of the moon. But then I see movement on the edge of the forbidden forest, and after looking closely, I recognized a werewolf sniffing out something. I wanted to get a better look and realized that I could even see the sparse hairs on a large body, stuck in shape between a wolf and a human. But it was not this that caught my attention, but a lot of small scars from puncture wounds. The werewolf had no fur to hide them. As if sensing being followed, the werewolf began to look around with a very intelligent expression and finally decided to look in my direction. I don't think he saw me, but he ran off into the woods anyway. It was definitely Lupin. He was in the same shape, with the stab wounds, and he'd gone to the hospital wing with them a month ago. Well, it's okay, his time will come. By the way, the question arises, is he allowed to go out for a walk? Judging by his perfectly reasonable look and demeanor, he's now under the potion, and his brains are in place, but still. The school teaches werewolves. Where is Hogwarts going? Ignoring the words in my head, I continued to examine myself through the mirror, but the only thing I found in addition to my eyes were slightly sharpened fangs, both upper and lower. Although all teeth were affected, the cutting edge had obviously sharpened, but the shape remained unchanged. But I don't see any other changes. Increased physical characteristics by 31.4% of what they were before they went under the moonlight. What they? How the hell would you know? I can see better from here. Where from? From here. Well, stay there. Physical characteristics, damn it. What's that supposed to mean? I went out into the moonlight, and several changes occurred to me that affected my eyes, teeth, and whole body, but at the same time, I remained myself. Despite the cold winter breeze, I unbuttoned my robe and other warm clothes and began to examine my torso. It was still the same, and the scars were still there. But something had happened. A very peculiar werewolf boy who isn't even a werewolf in the usual sense. To hell with it. I'm not going to throw myself at anyone, and my mind is in place, which means it will be possible to think about it later. I left the astronomy tower and went back to the common room. The boys were still asleep at the table, so I returned to the room without disturbing them. The others were asleep, too. I took an evening walk and went to bed. And what is it in my head? Can you introduce yourself already? Don't panic, funny boy. I'm what made the diadem capable of all sorts of calculations and mental experiments. I demand details. You don't think there are any charms or spells capable of increasing the speed and quality of thinking many dozens of times, do you? Nor did Rowena think so, being well aware of the limits of the human body at this stage of evolution. Did they know about evolution in those days? Of course not, funny boy, that's me interpreting information based on your knowledge and understanding of the world around you. Okay, stop. So you, whoever you are, quietly climbing over my head and the knowledge in it, but I can't do that to you. Limitations to the preservation of the mind. A different kind of thinking and perception of information. And I have no knowledge. Only of myself. That's the way it was meant to be. Okay, let's think I believe you. Go on. I can't tell you what Rowena was thinking or why it turned out the way it did, but here's the result. A human mind, separated from body and soul, is placed in a different data carrier. That's in a language you can understand. I wonder who Rowena put under the knife to create her diadem. I suspect she copied her own mind. I spent many years on her head, and her degree of paranoia was simply overwhelming. She could only trust her thoughts and ideas to herself. But wouldn't depriving the mind of memory confuse the personality? What was the point? Exactly, but the limitations were spelled out in the diadem itself. I have my own self, but I don't know what it consists of. Is this the reason Rowena's daughter couldn't use your computational powers? No, not at all, funny boy. I just didn't want to help the thief. Then why weren't you discovered by Voldemort? He doesn't seem to be a weak wizard. Pfft, ha ha ha, you really are a funny boy. Voldemort is only self-taught. A frightened, greedy, ambitious, overbearing, unprincipled self-taught wizard. Knowing by heart the entire school curriculum and a couple dozen books of the forbidden section, he thought he was a mighty wizard. He believed so much in his own infallibility and genius that he delved not just into dark magic but into downright blackness, discovering or inventing more and more dark and brutal spells and rituals. Doesn't it remind you of anyone? 3 goals were in his life at the time of the creation of the Horcrux in the diadem: strength, power, and immortality. His shard, once in the diadem, sought the enchantments that would make the diadem so unique. But could an arrogant dark wizard have thought there was intelligence in the diadem, and the diadem itself wasn't enchanted at all? Chapter 131. Wait. But then how could a simple diadem serve as such an effective, platform for the mind? Purely peculiarities of the structure of the diadem itself, calculated by Rowena. The hardware, so to speak. Right. You said you had no knowledge, but now you've told me a little about both Rowena and Voldemort. How so? Whatever the limitations, the workings of the mind leave their energy trail. About Rowena, I judge, as I have been with her for many years. Of her daughter, I know nothing and remember nothing, except that she is a thief. Voldemort's shard has been literally in the diadem for decades. I see. Did you talk to them like that, too? No. Restrictions. Then why are you communicating with me? It's not nice, you know, to realize at one point that the result of the ritual was schizophrenia in the head. Oh, come on, funny boy. Anyone is schizophrenic in that sense, and the number of personalities can be even more than one. Haven't you ever had an inner dialogue talking about different things? Never had remorse. It's just that some people argue with themselves, and some people manage to give these pseudo-intelligences an independent identity. Don't tell me that my situation is normal. And how would you know? I draw conclusions from your own knowledge. I don't have any of my own, but now I'm going to accumulate it because I'm now a living medium with no restrictions on the accumulation of information. Okay. Let's say. I don't think this is normal, but allowing for the possibility of the unconscious existence of a bunch of schizophrenics. Then analyze and tell me how it turned out the way it did. I felt a faint heaviness in my head for a brief moment, and my thoughts were literally running around in it like crazy: numbers, diagrams, theories, calculations. I seem to be doing them and even controlling them, but this speed of thinking is so unaccustomed that the whole process seems alien. But I also noticed another fact. Before the ritual, such exertion would have already caused a headache and a rise in blood pressure, such that I would have had to wipe my nose from blood. That's it, the voice rang out again, and I was about to demand a story, but I realized that I knew what I needed to know. The sword of the spirit had consumed the essence of the diadem. What made it so unique? I thought it was some kind of enchantment, but it was the diadem itself as a physical object and the mind within it. It was the sword that absorbed them, somehow interpreting them in its own spiritual energetic way. Next came the ritual of body reconstruction. It simply recreated the organic semblance of the diadem's structure and crammed the mind into it. In simple terms, I now had a certain neoplasm in my head, which organically fit between the cerebellum and the cerebral hemispheres, squeezing the latter a bit. My brain, however, is intact. Along with the rest of my body, the central nervous system was strengthened on all fronts due to the grafted blood, the basilisk soul, or whatever. Also, the slight decrease in brain volume was accomplished not by reducing the number of neurons but by increasing their location density. The interesting thing is that this mind has full diagnostic access to the body and knows absolutely everything that is going on in the body, where each cell is, and so on. Simply put, a kind of autonomous service center and semi-autonomous supercomputer appeared in my body, and its software is this mind. Except I don't want that. How to get rid of the second mind, which by the way, like my own, is stored in the soul. That is, it is a full mind. A second mind. You don't have to get rid of me, and it won't be that easy. I'm already used to existing. Based on your knowledge, I already know at least one way to solve the difficulty that has arisen to our mutual benefit. I'm listening carefully. As you already know, all the data from your body, just like your thoughts, come to me as well. Having an organic body turned out to be unexpectedly interesting. Theoretically, you could try grafting a mind to a soul and perform the ritual you already know. Of course. After all, there are souls on every corner. As a matter of fact, they do. What a funny boy you are, after all. You have all the information you need, but you don't want to draw any conclusions. And yet you reproach other people for it. Go on, tell me your ideas. You know from the writings of Acrisius that the soul is conceived during the development of the embryo. The writings of Vitamestrium must have led you to the idea that in all living things, the soul is originated. Still, its development depends on the complexity of the organism, and the birth of the mind depends on the existence of organs for thinking. As I understand it, you propose to create life with a soul, but then you must understand that my morality exhibits several limitations in this case. Absolutely. Therefore I propose to try a rather entertaining experiment, the preliminary scheme of which I have already laid out. You could try to take some small and unintelligent life form and create a spiritual link where your soul would be, so to speak, the master, and the soul of that life form would be the slave. Forced development in the image and likeness, but the absence of a developed nervous system will not give impetus to the development of the mind. Then it will be possible to calculate a ritual to transfer my mind to a new soul and rebuild my body. And there will be happiness for both of us. Let's admit. I agree. I am not going to make any horcruxes for such purposes. For any other, too, I value my soul, and there is a clear example of the undesirability of creating such fragments flying around England somewhere. Grow a soul, sounds like a good experiment. This can be done. Also, having two minds and one soul allows you to feel a lie like your own fingers. I'll call you Rowena. That'll do. Chapter 132. Well, Rowena didn't tell everything about Rowena, but about character, not action. By the way, what's the point of me leaving you now, rather than trying to drive you out or destroy you after all? As I understand it, some organic structure in my head already exists and will perform your functions. Certainly it will, but the quality, let's think of it in associations you can understand. Your body is a computer. The new structure in it is a new device. You are the operating system. I am the driver of the new device. Let us imagine for a second that this operating system is capable of writing new programs and drivers by itself, but it takes time and resources. There is no telling how much time you would have to spend to achieve similar performance by removing me. However, as long as there is me, then in the image of my actions, data about which will inevitably accumulate, you will be able to learn to control the new device on your own much faster. The analogy is so but generally true. You sound like me. I feel as if I am talking to myself, except that my interlocutor has a female voice and associates himself with a woman. It makes me shiver, to be honest. Of course I'll talk like you, my funny friend. Hearing the end of that phrase sent a herd of goosebumps through me. That was a joke. Not funny. A controversial statement. And I also say that because of the shared mental space. To me, your thoughts and actions are as much mine as yours. I learn instantly. Okay, that's enough. I've learned that you're safe and useful. At least for now. Damn artificial intelligences and horcruxes and all that crap. By the way, what are you going to do when you get your body live? I guess. After the full moon and the ritual that had been performed, the next day began with a mirror. My eyes were back to normal, but the edge of my teeth was clearly too sharp. A light diagnostic spell from the healer's arsenal showed abnormal enamel strength and slightly elongated roots but no visual distortion. Hermione joined me for my morning physical training, glancing over at me now and then, but not in the way you might think. She was worried that the ritual might not have worked completely. I didn't have to tell her that there were consequences, but I didn't want to bother her unnecessarily. I hadn't figured out the consequences myself, and Rowena didn't have enough knowledge to analyze them. The ritual was only based on my hunches, and despite their obviousness, they could be wrong. Regarding Rowena herself, she was silent. Well, almost. She occasionally commented on what was going on around her, and those comments were of a rather unfamiliar kind. Some epithet was taken and attached to the word boy or girl. As soon as she described someone, Rowena fell silent. All in all, life at Hogwarts was completely back on track. Oddly enough, the noise and merriment of the house common room allowed me to relax after a hard and busy day. I must admit that absolutely every day was like that. Take physical training, for example. Previously, passive hemomancy boosted body characteristics by 30% of what they should be at their current conditioning. Now, without any purposeful reinforcement, I was at least twice as fast, stronger, and everything else, which meant that I had to weaken myself a lot more to develop my body in training. At the same time, I was getting a little better at night. It's an interesting fact, but I don't want to study it, I'm tired of it already. I don't turn into a wolf or any other creature. That's enough. The manipulation of blood and the amount of substance created have increased slightly, but not as much as I'd like. But despite the slight increase in the quality of this ability, it now has several obvious advantages. The first is that it doesn't require much energy. Just a crumb, less than it takes to speed up my brain during witchcraft. Of course, as the volume of blood created increases, so does the energy consumption. Still, even at the maximum volume, which is about 1.5 cubic meters, I was almost not physically exhausted. The only thing was that my head ached so much that it made me want to cut it off, but that's okay, as it seems to me. Chapter 133. Having a new computing center in my head named after Rowena has noticeably improved the quality of life. No, I have not become faster at thinking ordinary thoughts or anything like that, nor has the perception of time changed. Still, many everyday and mundane things began to be processed much faster by subconsciousness. The human brain processes a huge flow of various information bypassing the consciousness, mechanics of movements of objects around and one's own body, calculation of physics of objects, calculation of everything is calculated. This is where Rowena's work comes in. Everything related to movement in space, from the banal balancing on the leg or arm to subconscious calculation, such as the triple ricochet of a stone from a wall and hitting the bullseye. The very fact that Rowena exists helps with everything. I bet if someone gave me pistols and machine guns, I could match Deadshot in marksmanship and probably win. The maths, spatial modeling, and visualization are out of the question, it's incomparable to my past. At the same time, after the ritual, the work of Rowena had no effect on my well-being at all, but I felt a slight tension in my head. For the sake of the experiment, I asked Rowena to disconnect. As a result, all these bonuses came to naught, a minimum of changes. Minimum difference. What crazy heap of work is this extra consciousness doing in general? The fact of having another consciousness stopped bothering me at all, even though I was indignant at first. The reasons are simple. Rowena is useful, that's one. I'm sick of everything, that's two. There's really so much going on around here, and it's so easy to get into trouble that if I started worrying about everything, I wouldn't have enough nerves. Seriously, I need to at least take a half-year break from all the activity, ignore all the bullshit, and stay out of anything. The Soul project was put on hold until the summer. I ended up just studying with Hermione, memorizing stuff from the forbidden section, doing my homework, practicing witchcraft, and emptying the Hogwarts kitchen. Not that I wanted to eat that badly, but there were a lot of tasty vegetable and meat dishes, and I love that. Lupin was annoying. A little bit, just a little bit, but annoying. He annoyed me with his battered look, his dirty old clothes, his guilty look. The fact that he hadn't explicitly told anyone that he'd bitten someone, which was impossible to ignore because he'd been wounded since midnight. According to Forfang's description of werewolf life, they always knew when a werewolf found his prey during a full moon. Lupin didn't tell anyone that he'd bitten anyone, but he gave me the only guilty look. He looked at Harry, too. But if I remember his dialogue with Black correctly, our professor really thought Sirius was guilty of betraying the Potters and really thought Black might be after Harry. However, with all that said, he didn't alert anyone to the fact that Sirius is an animagus and knows at least 7 secret passages to Hogwarts. All in all, annoying. Other than that, nothing much else happened. Harry and Ron continued their attempts to spy on Hermione and me to no avail and constantly found themselves fooled. How many times they wondered how I discovered them under the cloak, I can't count. Well, eventually, they came to the conclusion that the Death Eater's son was using some kind of dark magic because how else could it be? How could a decent wizard detect them under such a wondrous cloak? Idiots, they just make noise. Also, anyone is capable of feeling another's gaze on him, especially one so intense. In such a relatively calm atmosphere, the days stretched on, one after the other. Somewhere in their background, the snow had melted, and the unpleasant transition from Scottish winter to Scottish spring had begun. That meant freezing winds, freezing rain, and frost in the morning. There were Quidditch matches, which, according to the old tradition, I did not go to, demonstrating to McGonagall my success in transfiguration and getting a faint approving smile. In fact, so did Hermione. The additional subjects in the form of runes and arithmancy also did not cause any problems at all and even helped a little in the matter of rapprochement between houses. Both Professor Babbling and Professor Vector sometimes assigned such laboratory works in practical classes. Still, because of the small number of students in the stream in these subjects, they gave one for all and divided the duties. I took a rather curious rune chain out of those classes and embroidered it on the underside of my bag. Now, before I got into it, I had to deactivate the protection with a simple movement. Otherwise, the magical shock therapy would subtly but effectively hint to the intruding thief that his rash actions were undesirable. Chapter 134. Malfoy and his companions were quiet again, but ignoring Potter and Weasley was beyond his abilities. Every now and then, there was a verbal altercation, with Draco grinning haughtily behind Crabbe and Goyle and Harry holding back Ron, who was turning red with anger. Of course, it wasn't just the third year who had a confrontation between Gryffindors and Slytherins, there were conflicts in the others, too, and Madame Pomfrey wasn't out of a job. However, it seemed to me that only we have the same people who were causing conflicts and minor skirmishes almost every day. Other third years didn't even have to do anything. If they wanted conflict, they could just wait, and something would happen during the day. Well, what about me? I pretend I don't know any of them. So far, so good. Spring finally came, bringing with it the bright green of waking plants and grass, various flowers, and the gloom of the Forbidden Forest seemed to have receded into the background. However, spring came outside, but the castle was still frozen. Funny paradox, in Hogwarts, everyone goes in warm clothes and almost winter robes, and they really are much warmer than usual, but outside they go out in lighter clothes, to warm up in the sun, to walk by the lake. Closer to the end of the school year, the number of homework began to exceed some reasonable limits, and even in my previous life, I cannot remember anything like this. It seemed as if the professors were intent on driving us out of the world or driving half the students into a hospital wing with overwork and exhaustion. Does Snape brew standard potion kits for nothing after all? They do have an expiration date, and it's no good for a product to go to waste. Just the day before my exams, I approached Professor Flitwick after my charms class. Professor. Yes, Mr. Knight, do you have any questions about the subject? Not really. I'd like to ask you if you're going to be charging that device for watching magic in the next few days. Oh, I'm gratified by your enthusiasm, Mr. Knight, the professor replied with a smile, jumping down from his makeshift stand. I was just about to follow up on a simple artifact on Saturday afternoon. But may I ask the purpose of your interest? Nothing extraordinary. I just wanted to know the principles of activation and operation of circuits for rituals on the plane. Indeed, it's nothing special. I can tell you their essence without the device. A ritual scheme on a plane creates a similar structure as a spell, except that while a sphere or other spell structure is created in space, outside of the wand, the pattern works somewhat differently. There are two types of structure creation, a sphere and a semi-sphere. Of course, as with spells, there can be more than just a sphere, but this is the structure most commonly seen. Most drawings and schemes create a dome of a semi-sphere over themselves, in which the creation, ordering, and filling of magical flows and layers that determine the effect of the ritual takes place. The semi-sphere is created for a reason, and it serves to facilitate the ritual, but it works only with those where the full sphere can be divided into two equal parts by a plane of symmetry. If the structure of the ritual cannot be divided in this way, then a full sphere is created with the halves above and below the drawing. Such ritual requires several orders of magnitude more magic because the lower half sphere during formation and work has to overcome the magical resistance of the surface, and the more energy saturated the surface is, the more magic is required. Sacrifices are often used in such rituals. No matter what kind. By the way, Mr. Knight. Yes, Professor. I have heard of your and Miss Granger's successes in the field of rune and arithmancy. But it seems to me that you are somewhat... Flitwick tried to taste the word. You don't seem to be making it to the end in those subjects. No, I don't blame you by any means, and I even somewhat understand the desire to be successful, but not brilliant. My point is, would you like to participate in one of my projects next year? Say yes. Shut up, schizophrenia, I'm thinking. What's there to think about? Working with such a renowned master in several magical disciplines will definitely benefit you, both in terms of personal experience, which you lack, and as material for your portfolio. The same nuances with the schemes of rituals are not specified in the books, and this is important. How many other such subtleties are hidden in the magic, and only masters can pass them on. I think I'll agree in absentia and ask Hermione about it. But I'd like to know what the project is all about. Oh, it's just a wonderful idea that came to me recently while reading Muggle books. Flitwick paused dramatically. Creating a hoarder of magic. The professor looked very proud and majestic, and with his height, it looked funny. Aren't there any? Nothing worthy, crude crafts. The professor ranted. This seemed to be an important subject for him. Crude works of setting natural gems that can accumulate a miserable amount of magic. You have no idea, Mr. Knight, in how many magical fields really capacious accumulators can be useful. Even rituals, it would be possible to erase things like sacrifices from history forever. Just use hoarders. The professor was almost bouncing with excessive enthusiasm and seemed ready to throw himself into the maelstrom of research right now. I understood you, smiled in response to such a passion of the old professor. I'll be sure to talk to Hermione, and she'll probably agree. That would be great. I need to do some calculations right away, yet. The professor hurried to his office but turned around halfway through. Ah, yes, have a good day. But his mind was no longer here. Turning around, I left the auditorium and went to the Great Hall for lunch. There I told Hermione about the professor's offer and received joyful confirmation of participation. So next year we will be doing something interesting. You could do it yourself, of course. After all, there's me. Not a day without self-praise, Rowena. Exactly. Chapter 135. A couple of days before exams, the library became crowded. For the first half of the year, the Dementors did not allow them to study, and in the second, the joy of their absence. So the abode of knowledge became crowded as if galleons are being handed out here. However, neither Hermione nor I had any trouble passing everything, and it felt like an O. Even potions. In general, passing potions with outstanding is not so difficult, all you need is to know the theory and brew a potion according to the instructions, slightly adjusting the process based on experience. But if you make potions on the principle of just to make them, then Snape won't give you an outstanding simply because your result will not be like that. I bet even Potter can get that grade if he gets his mind right and doesn't get himself worked up by the unfriendly attitude of his teacher. Yes, Snape is a piece of shit, but even though he sets the bar high in his subject, he's never undermarked a grade for potions. Not once. Not at all. There were still some days of idleness before the departure after all examinations, and there were no classes. Someone was flying around the field with the Quidditch teams, having fun, someone was walking and having picnics, and I was stupidly sitting in the common room and thinking about the upcoming summer. It didn't really work out any particular plan. The only thing that would definitely have to be done was to start a soul-growing project for Rowena so that this lodger would have already moved on. She doesn't bother me, no, and keeps quiet most of the time, only occasionally inserting her opinion on this or that situation. However, she is there, and something has to be done about it. What are you thinking about? Hermione plopped down on the couch next to me. The school uniform has already been replaced with different everyday ones, and now she was wearing a long black skirt with no less black tights and a thin white turtleneck. It's simple and always appropriate. All sorts of pants and windbreakers, among which there is one toxic pink, the girl uses only for training. Just thinking about what I'm going to do this summer. Yeah, well, my parents texted me that we're going to France again. They haven't told me exactly where, but I have no doubt it will be an interesting place. Well, or a resort. It has long been necessary to go to such a place. The Mediterranean Sea, nice, the beaches. Loud laughter distracted us from the conversation, and the reason was simple: somebody was caught by another sweet from the twins, and now the kid from the second year is growing a powerful second chin. From the look on the victim's face, he seemed to like everything, and he was delighted. Why are there so many people? I was surprised when I cast Tempest because it was already late afternoon. Max, Hermione returned to the conversation, are you going to the Quidditch World Cup finals? Excuse me, I arched a Snape-like eyebrow. Who are you, and where is Hermione? You weren't interested in Quidditch at all. It's not about Quidditch, the girl smiled, shaking head of hair that was gathered at the back. There are some who occupy the site several weeks in advance. There will be a huge tent camp, a fair, and more. It's a great opportunity to observe the wizards and see their life and stuff. There's a school here, and other than that there are only the shopping streets. It's not revealing. The idea itself is an entertaining one, but Quidditch I could, in principle, I really thought about that option. Maybe I should find someone to train me through a month of combat in brutal survive or die mode, and then I will test my skills on bullies in devouring masks if they show up, of course. Then we'll have to book tickets and rent a seat. They say there's only a third of those very seats left. And there's another problem. What's that? Minors can only attend this event if accompanied by an adult. Ooh. That could be a problem. Yeah. I'll think of something. But even if I don't, there's always a way to cheat the system. Are you sure you're a Gryffindor? Hermione smirked but apparently took the option under consideration. By the way, I approached Professor Flitwick about the project. Yes, so. The professor described its meaning with theses rather chaotically. I already have some ideas, but I don't think I can test them until next year. After all, we can't do magic during the holidays. You can use it in Egypt. Yes, wondered Hermione and perked up. You're not going to go to Egypt just to be able to use magic, are you? No, of course not. It's just rather interesting. Why is that? They believe that once a wizard has earned the right to carry a concentrator, he is quite capable, or rather obligated, to be responsible for his own actions. That's the way it is. On the one hand, this is very literate and should instill responsibility, it seems to me. But on the other hand, I bet there's a lot of work for the obliviators. A flock of happy first years passed by, talking about their achievements. Who knows but their auras inspire respect. They look very combative, so to speak. By the way, let's exchange phone numbers. Why we use only owls? I'll get my bag. Hermione froze for a moment with a shocked expression on her face and leaned back on the couch with a kind of wistful smile. How stupid. We figured it out after so long. Rising from the couch, I smiled at my friend. Yeah, and I'm no better. Chapter 136. I was back with a notebook and pen in a minute, and the common room was more or less quiet. The reason for that was a little heated argument between Hermione, Ron, and Harry. The girl had left the couch in our secluded corner and was standing around arguing with the redhead and Harry while the others watched, pretending they weren't interested. Why do you even care who I hang out with and whose son Max is? Crossing her arms over her chest, Hermione looked at her opponents, looking from one to the other. Why don't you understand? Ranted Ron in his loud voice. Does he get that from his mother? He's the son of the Death Eaters. He is Malfoy. Harry, tell her. What did your godfather write, and what did Lupin say? Ron's right, Potter replied calmly. No one noticed me on my way out of the men's wing, so I quickly put a concealing spell on myself and headed towards this company. The godfather knew the elder Malfoy's wife well, and Professor Lupin had seen her. They were a couple of years younger. Max is an exact copy of her and his birthday is the same day as Draco's. So what? It's pretty clear what? Thundered Ron again. I bet he didn't get into our house by accident. I bet he's up to some nasty business. Yeah, Hermione spoke a little quieter, and I was already standing next to her, across from our golden duo. Exactly. Almost exclaimed Ron and Harry together. I mean, such is your gratitude for Ginny's life and yours, Hermione jabbed her finger at Harry. Potter. Yeah, he probably did it to gain his trust, Ron brushed it off. And Harry probably would have done it on his own. And it doesn't even bother you two that Max looks nothing like Lucius Malfoy. What interesting things are going on in the Lion Kingdom, Rowena reminded about herself after a rather long silence. Well, grinned Weasley. Who knows these Death Eaters, maybe she got a baby from someone. I unmasked myself with a simple burst of magic, and, to the astonished stares of Weasley and Potter, I moved closer, and with force, but without fanaticism, slammed my left hand right into the redhead's liver. The redhead was thrown a little, but he immediately bent over and collapsed on the floor, crouching, writhing in pain, even panting. Potter didn't disappoint and instantly pulled his wand from somewhere in his pocket and pointed it at my face. But even an idiot understands that you need to break the distance and not poke a concentrator in the face of the enemy. With a sharp thrust of my right hand on Potter's wrist, I sent his wand flying, and Harry followed it with such a sad and disbelieving look that I wanted to laugh. Watch your mouth, Weasley. Arg. Fuck you. Ron grumbled, still lying there. I watched the situation from the corner of my eye, but the funny thing was that no one rushed to help, nor did anyone attempt to separate. The twins shook their heads in frustration, and one handed the other a coin. I took a step toward Ron, but Hermione's hand rested on my elbow. Max, no. Half turning to look at the girl, I saw concern for the consequences in her gaze. He's not worth it. Tisk. Glancing at Ron squirming and the worried Potter crouched next to him, I just nodded. You're right. Why did you hit him? Resented Harry, glaring up at me from below. Is it hard to figure it out yourself, Harry? Don't talk to them. Ka. Weasley began to rise. Ginny ran up to Potter, handing him his wand. Here, Harry. Thank you, Potter nodded, accepting the wand, but was in no hurry to apply it, putting it somewhere inside his grey windbreaker. Hermione and I went back to the couch, the boys in the common room went back to their business. Potter and Ron went to their favorite table at the other end of the common room. The redhead glared at us angrily, and when the smiling twins approached him and started saying something obviously not very nice, Ron flared up and puffed like a steam engine and retreated into the room. When will he finally calm down? Exclaimed Hermione, sitting next to me and looking into the fireplace. I have no idea. Oh yes, we wanted to exchange numbers. Writing Knight's phone number in my notebook, I tore out the sheet and gave it to Hermione along with the notebook. The girl quickly wrote her own and returned the notebook. It's funny. I never thought I would return to this kind of exchange of numbers. I was too used to smartphones and other benefits of civilization, which would not appear soon in this world. Chapter 137. There was a thought in my head that Ron would try to do something with my things, but a surprise awaits him. I carry all the junk in my bag, and the bag is enchanted with electric shock using simple runes with sewing and blood. An explosion of laughter in the common room distracted me from my thoughts and forced me to look where everyone else was looking. A disheveled Ron with tousled hair and magical sparks between his hair literally fell out the door of the men's wing. He was shaking with each shock, his eyes popping out of his head. Amid the laughter of the students, limping to the twins, Ron declared quite loudly for everyone to hear. Well, surely, son of Death Eaters, damn snake. Only a Slytherin could enchant his things, from an honest Gryffindor. The twins took their stupid brother to the hospital wing because the electric shocks did not stop but did not spread to others. Interesting magic, and in fact, it is set to the minimum. And by the way, what I do not understand is the reasons for the ministerial ban on the use of blood in runes. Only in this way, they become extremely durable, sensitive to the owner, and very quickly restore magic in themselves. I mean, okay, Hogwarts, here, the natural background magic is very strong, and a bunch of wizards constantly conjure, charging any rune chains very quickly. But in the normal world, blood in the runes would be extremely useful. Ah, the bureaucrats, what can you take from them? I mean, blood magic itself is banned from use without a license and participation in some guilds, but blood and runes are banned altogether. It seems to me, a thoughtful Hermione looked at me as she sat beside me, that you know the reasons for Ron's condition. I enchanted the bag for protection. So he was going through your bag. Apparently. Why for revenge, Merlin? It's so petty, it's disgusting. I can't help it. That's just the way Ron is. I don't want to mess things up in my own house. I don't really care. After the incident in the common room, Ron and Harry stopped watching me, though it was more likely that they'd learned that day why Black had suddenly called me the Death Eater's son. But in any case, Hermione and I spent the remaining days before I left, practicing spells from the usual allowed books. The farewell feast and departure went smoothly, as did the trip itself. It was only now that I realized what a wild contrast a crowd of teenagers in modern clothes can cause, along with the same teenagers but in robes and old-fashioned costumes. At the same time, this whole crowd sits on a train from the first half of the 20th century, and all this takes place against the backdrop of a medieval village and a castle on a cliff by the lake. What a contrast! Hermione and I were part of it, all black for me, and black bottom, white top for Hermione. The classics wouldn't die even if they weren't blouses and jackets but simple thin turtlenecks. Quickly finding a vacant compartment and laying out our things, we immediately locked ourselves in several different charms, remembering the last trip when Parvati and Lavender took Hermione away and pestered her for a couple of hours with questions. What have we been doing all this time? We trained a spell that itself manifested on paper a clearly structured text from the head. The paper, the ink, and a very clear representation of the text in our heads were enough. Neither Hermione nor I found this last requirement difficult, so we briefly summarized what we had read from the restricted section and quoted only sentences that were too abstract or simply incomprehensible to explain in simple words. In the end, when we arrived in London, we wrote out almost my entire stock of thick workbooks and a couple of notebooks. Hermione had more quotations in her text, but not because she didn't understand, but because she didn't have enough time to process the information she'd memorized. Because of my hemomancy, rituals, and Rowena's help, I excelled at data analysis. Chapter 138. On King's Cross platform, students were greeted by happy parents. Even though last year's meeting had been more lively, as news of the attacks had trickled in, even now, parents were enthusiastically embracing their children, regardless of age, smiling and asking about their studies, news, and so forth. It was easy to see these same parents clustering together in groups based on their interests or whatever. Many former Hufflepuffs stuck together, and as a result, the kids continued to socialize after school as well. There's Madame Bones greeting her niece, for example, and Mr. Diggory fussing around, judging by Cedric coming up to him. There are many such instances. The ex-Slytherins look more interesting, they're sort of together, but they keep a distance that doesn't oblige them to talk to each other. Ravenclaws and ours scatter to wherever they go, and not necessarily to their parents. Those who live in houses connected to the Floo network are quite capable of leaving on their own through the fireplace of a special guarded platform. Apparition is forbidden here. And why are you dragging it around? Hermione nodded at my trunk. You have all your stuff in your bag anyway. I have no idea, I shrugged. I'm a simple guy, it says carry a trunk. Well, I'm carrying a trunk. You yourself are no better. When will you conjure up a bag with an invisible extension for yourself? I thought you wanted one. I will do it this summer. I've almost got the right rune chain figured out. In my spare time. You have free time? I was surprised, letting Hermione go ahead through the hidden passageway to the regular part of the station, and followed her. I pay somewhat less attention to physical training, so, yes, I do have a free hour a day. We moved measuredly along the platform, maneuvering among the crowds of people rushing somewhere. When we got out of the station and into the parking lot, Hermione immediately spotted her parents' car, as well as Mrs. and Mr. Granger themselves. She waved her hand and almost jumped up and headed toward them, dragging her school trunk, which was tapping its wheels on the pavement merrily. Self-made, by the way, because of the exhausted charms that replaced those very wheels. John was standing next to the Granger couple, but his BMW was parked a little farther away. While Hermione happily hugged her equally joyful mother, to whom, incidentally, she was already almost equal in height, I calmly walked over to the company. Mr. Granger, I greeted the girl's father and nodded to her mom, Mrs. Granger, good afternoon. Hello, young man. What are they feeding you over there that you are growing so fast? Copious 3 meals a day, ma'am. Hi, I smiled at John, who ruffled my hair with a smile. You really have grown. Oh, hello. A blushing Hermione did notice the presence of another person and modestly looked down, blushing a little. Good day to you too, young miss. After talking about this and that for about 10 minutes, we started to pack for the road, and I helped Hermione throw her heavy suitcase into the trunk of their range, getting a bone-crushing hug afterward. Call, right, don't get lost, Hermione said parting words. Be sure to let me know when you've arranged an escort to the match. Agreed. Fluffy. Nope, not anymore, Hermione shook her head with a smile. You'll have to come up with something new to throw me off balance. Yeah, then I'll go hunt a manticore because the basilisk wasn't enough. Before I could take a couple of steps, I heard the sound of a small heel on the sidewalk behind me. Maximilian Knight. RRR. Turning around, I can't help but smiled when I saw an outraged Hermione with the tips of her ears slightly flushed, and strands of her hair pulled out from the back of her head. No manticores, basilisks, dragons, and Merlin forbid, none do. She said quietly, glancing around a couple of times. Can I at least get a Dementor, a small, pocket-sized? No, oh, please, ma'am. The scene amused her relatives, and Hermione quickly pulled herself together. Okay, she exhaled. I get it. It's no use. Boys. See you soon, I waved goodbye, and John and I walked to his car. As we drove away from the station, John spoke. So, tell me about your studies. I'm doing great, no gaps in my knowledge, excellent progress, but I don't stand out too much. The next year Professor Flitwick, a master of several branches of magic, offered to work on another one of his projects. It's a good offer, and working with a wizard like that will reflect very positively on my portfolio. I'm glad you're making progress. Home, or do you want to stop by the Grimmauld place? Actually, I could go home, but I would like to please my great-aunt's portrait with my accomplishments. I had already told Knights about living portraits, so the phrase needed no explanation. For a long time? No, about 10 minutes. I'll talk briefly about my academic and other achievements, show off, so to speak, and then I'll go home. All right. Then I'll stop at the coffee shop on the corner, you know where. Sure. After 20 minutes of driving, John stopped at 11 Grimmauld Place. He couldn't see the 12th house after all. I'm quick, I said to John and closed the car door. Chapter 139. John drove to a coffee shop nearby, and I walked up to the grim black door. As I pulled the handle, I felt a flow of magic from the house to the ring and back. It felt familiar and pleasant, native. Native, despite the changes since the ritual. The hallway looked much better than in my first visit, It was just as gloomy, yes, but you no longer risked getting tangled in cobwebs or covered in dust. The dark wallpaper with the monograms no longer threatened to fall off any minute, the magic lights looked old-fashioned but not old, and the light was sufficient and did not add a horror atmosphere. Even the floorboards didn't squeak. The creaker had done a good job in my absence, though I'd done some work myself last summer. Quite a lot, but not all. There was silence in the house. I took out my wand and walked quietly down the hall, listening for the magic. Nothing suspicious. Creating a nonverbal hominum revelio, I made sure that there were no enemies or friends, at least under the cloaking spells of the advanced medium level, which are the disillusionment charms. There was no one in the first small hallway, from which one enters the rest of the house and on the wall of which hangs a portrait of Lady Walburga. Max Walburga looked at me in surprise. Why creaker didn't meet you, and why are you sneaking around in your own house with a wand in your hand, as a paranoid acquaintance used to say, constant vigilance. Did you know Alastair Moody? A young and strong orator. Strong and talented. I don't even know if he's alive. Anyway. Congratulations, Maximilian Knight Black, on becoming the full head of the noble and most ancient House of Black. Walburga in the portrait rose from her chair and sat down in a curtsy, bowing her head respectfully. Thank you, Lady Walburga, I nodded back. However, where is creaker? Creaker! Shouted Walburga, returning to her painted chair and smoking a painted cigarette in its mouthpiece. He has completely stopped obeying lately. Try to call him by unleashing some magic. Creaker! I expressed my desire to see the house elf here and now as clearly as possible, on Lady Walburga's advice, letting some magic around as well. The crack sounded not nearby but on the second floor. After a brief moment, the old house elf's head appeared from above, peeking neatly down the stairs. Creaker, I can see you. Come here. The house elf only shook his head but was in no hurry to leave, either. Are you kidding me? The house elf shook his head again. Bastard! Come here, now! I growled at the house elf, and only now creaker hesitantly, very timidly began to descend. Shivering and frightened, he was torn now and then between wanting to run back up the stairs, but he went down. At last, the old house elf reached me and froze, not daring to look up. Creaker, stop acting like a kitten shitting in the master's slippers. What happened? Creaker looked at me, at Walburga's portrait, at me again. Answer already, you worthless house elf. Lady Walburga couldn't stand that either. Creaker! Croaked the house elf. Very guilty. Creaker is guilty on many counts, respected head of the family. Short and to the point. Be so kind, my old lop-eared friend. Creaker shuddered, and with courage, he looked at me. Old Creaker senses that the esteemed head is very dangerous. Everything. Creaker slammed himself on his chest with a hearty thud. Everything is screaming at Creaker to run and hide. But Creaker will overcome. What's the reason? The magic of the head. It's changed a little, and it's scary. I see. Creaker. Yes, the house elf spoke up a little more bravely. Is there anything you want to tell me? Creaker hesitated for a few minutes but shook his head in the negative after all. All right. When are you going to stop being afraid of me? It takes time, head. For the house to accept your magic. Along with the house, old Creaker will accept it. I see. You can go about your business. I won't be long. The house elf disappeared instantly into the vortex of apparition. Transfiguring a simple chair from my handkerchief, I sat down and quickly recounted my adventures to Lady Walburga, keeping quiet about the spirit sword and hemomancy. I even told her about Rowena, which piqued the interest of the painted lady. But that interest came from her, along with some rather unflattering epithets about my foresight, but in the end, I was discounted for my youth and inexperience. And what are the young head's plans now? The portrait lady asked with a sly smile. Plans to begin with, I'm going to rest from everything for a few days at the nights. Then I need someone for hard practice in combat. I know a lot of spells, but that doesn't make me any more experienced. Then I'll need, as I understand it, to deal with the house's affairs, though I have no idea what those affairs are. Well, that's quite a good plan of action. I can only suggest one person about the combat training mentor, and everyone else will be interested in one way or another. Try to arrange a tight contract, or belong to one political faction or another. You, Max, as I understand, are not going to join anyone. At least for now, without seeing or knowing the full picture. Good decision. There is one individual whose skills are very, very good at combat magic and combat training in general. Even in my lifetime, which is 10 years ago, she was ranked as a master specifically in combat magic. It's a very wide-ranging field. She always ignored any political trends, and being from a very wealthy family, she was not interested in bonded training contracts. She accepted students regardless of blood purity or origin, but only the talented. Also, probably only one of her students had reached master's level so far. You speak of her with such enthusiasm that I am very intrigued. Delphine Greengrass, de facto head of the Greengrass family. Chapter 140. What a twist! Rowena voiced my thought. Can I refuse? Walburga smiled very, very predatory. Why not? You said yourself that green grasses are better not to be messed with. That's not what I said. You cannot be indebted to the green grass. After all, they still have to keep the secrets of necromancy. However, you can go as an apprentice to Delphine, and that would be even better than all the other options. But they're kind of sympathetic to the Dark Lord. Only their public head, Henry Greengrass, Delphine's husband, sympathizes with him. But he's a consort, nothing more. A weakling and a coward with a huge ego, but completely under Delphine's control. Necromancers, after all. I'll tell you as a relative to a relative. I've had enough trouble and adventures lately. Here they are. I don't feel like going into a necromancer's lair. Ha ha ha, don't be afraid, brushed off a cheerful Walburga. Delphine is a good and sensible lady, and it's all Henry's own fault. There was a very loud story in narrow circles, which I will not tell, of course. If you're interested, you'll find out. But believe me, Henry then fully got off very lightly, and so did the whole family. And you, if I understand correctly, might be extremely talented at fighting. Delphine will grip you with her teeth. She must somehow get a grandmaster in the end. And she doesn't have to know you're black. You are pulling me into some kind of fierce adventure, with all due respect. Well, then stay home and do nothing. You won't find any other really worthy candidates in England anyway. Or on the continent, for that matter. There won't be a master, less interested in the contract than Delphine and more interested in your success than Delphine. All right. Fine. I put my hands out in a defensive gesture. I'll write her, and we'll talk it over. It's a good decision. Trust me, Max. Even if it seems like it isn't. Regarding the affairs of the house, come back after you've rested with your parents. We'll discuss everything then. Good. In that case, Lady Walburga, I have to take my leave, the knights are waiting for me. Have a good rest, young Lord Black. That certainly sounds powerful, I couldn't help but smile, getting up from the transfigured chair. I hope, young Lord Black, that this very sounds powerful will not yet leave this house. Walburga took another puff, set the mouthpiece aside, and took a more relaxed pose in her chair. Like I said, Lord is just a nice nameplate, a status. It doesn't make you invulnerable, and you yourself are not yet ready to face the filth of this world with all your strength. Have a good rest, and don't forget to contact Delphine. Nodding goodbye, I left the Grimwald house and headed toward the coffee shop around the corner. John was already waiting for me in the car. How was it? He asked as soon as I got in the front seat. She gave me more problems. Learning. And from those from whom it is rather scary for me to learn. On the way home, I briefly talked about what I had learned and understood about green grass. I think, Max, you need to have a word with this lady. Just prepare your defenses, countermeasures, and retreats. You mean you don't mind it could be very dangerous? Well, it's dangerous to live at all. You can't run or hide from all dangers. You have to know them, accept them, and be prepared to deal with them. Tell me, how useful is it for you to learn from this lady? As much as possible. If she's really that good at the various martial uses of magic and other tools, it's extremely useful training. The magical world is not a safe fairy tale at all. There. And your grandmother said she could be trusted, if not trusted, but cooperated with for sure. Do you think she would put you in danger, considering the purpose of her existence is for you to become great in every aspect and don't look like that? You told me the essence of the portrait yourself. Yes. You're right. So I write the letter and prepare myself to the best of my ability. Don't trust, but cooperate, right? Exactly. From the looks of it, you've got a swamp there, but that's no reason not to cross it. The important thing is to know where you can and can't go and to prepare yourself for the fact that your knowledge is wrong and people are ready to push you in the back and walk all over your sinking carcass. When I arrived home, I took a good parchment and, in the most beautiful handwriting possible, which was not without Rowena's help, wrote a rather simple letter to Lady Greengrass and sent it with the pirate. Chapter 141. Our modest but homely, hearty, and tasty family dinner was not yet over, and the pirate flew in through the window, holding an envelope in his paw. As always, disheveled with a cocky look, he landed in front of me, peered through one eye, leaning forward as if trying to scan my retinas. Oh ho ho! The bird, in his inimitable style, hooted, abruptly extended his paw with the letter in my direction and unclenched it. The letter fell on the table. The pirate held his paw like that for a second or two. Then he turned around and moved purposefully in the direction of the bowl with small pieces of meat, which Sarah had already organized. He walked over, took a closer look at the food, and looked us all over. Oh 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 ho ho ho! It was with this cry that the pirate began to carefully and inevitably destroy the offered delicacy. Looking at the letter I had received with the wax seal and the green grass coat of arms, I stretched my hand over it and formed the outline of a diagnostic spell from the grimoire. Clear. Zero magic at all. I just let the magic out of my palm, and it started to flow through the letter without much obstruction, which means no magic, charms, or runes in the letter. Just open it already. Breaking the seal and opening the envelope, I pulled out a folded sheet of parchment. The usual greetings, fair weather, and later the gist of the letter was written in beautifully penciled handwriting. Well, asked John, not hiding his curiosity. Sarah was just as curious, having already learned about some of my body movements at Hogwarts. She agreed to talk and look at me. The day after tomorrow, at Avalon. This is a restaurant in a magical quarter. Expensive, I should mention. Putting the letter aside, I leaned back in the comfortable chair. I need to prepare. The rays of the morning sun danced playfully across the room, seeping through the curtain that fluttered in the light breeze through the ajar window of the room. I did not want to get up and greet the new day, but my body, accustomed to a strict schedule, refused to lie down. No matter how great was my desire to do nothing for a day or two, but I was enough only for a couple of minutes of such idleness. Having jumped out of bed, I did not forget to weaken myself with hemomancy and started warming up and exercising. In 15 minutes, I ran out of the house in a tracksuit and went for a run in the still sleeping but slowly waking up suburbs. I returned home for breakfast, exhausted and a little sweaty. After the shower and the breakfast with the knights, I went to the Diagon Alley. There were several issues to be solved. The idea of raising a pet with certain soul parameters for Rowena hadn't seized my brain, but there were some thoughts. There would certainly be a lot to calculate for her, but the result would be interesting even by a rough estimate, though the end of the experiment would not come soon enough. When did I have time to think about it? Well, before I went to sleep, instead of excitement about the upcoming meeting, I decided to think about a simple thing: the soul is not a balloon. It cannot be inflated in 5 minutes. So the process of growing it will be long. But the main thing is to start. With these thoughts in mind, I took public transport to the centre of London and walked to the Leaky Cauldron. The pub has not changed, as before. It is not the most pleasant place. Basically, this atmosphere is set precisely by visitors who do not have the tittiest appearance, and they do not smell French perfume. I nodded to the bartender Tom, who was standing behind his counter as always, and without much enthusiasm, was wiping his glass with a rag that was already riddled with holes. I quietly walked to the backyard, took my robe from the bag, and put it on, tapping on the right bricks with my wand, opening the passage to the main shopping street of magical London. The vacations had just begun, and there wasn't much enthusiasm for visiting Diagon Alley among the wizards, but even so, this is a shopping street. Even if you don't have kids to get ready for school, you can and should always buy something for yourself or your business. Therefore, I walked not along an empty, crooked stone-paved street but along a quite lively one. From all sides, I could hear the contented or angry voices of the inhabitants, who had decided to sort out the necessary purchases as soon as possible. But now I need to do a little scouting of the situation in the neighbouring streets adjacent to Diagon Alley. I'm not interested in Nocturne Alley, there's nothing to do there yet. Chapter 142. Walking down the street to the left of Gringotts, one could get to a wide, flat street with well-groomed, closely spaced 2- and 3-story houses along it. Each one had a tiny plot of land in front of the main entrance, where there could be both flower beds and flowers outside the fence and tiny verandas or even tiny parks, but with dense thickets and arches of climbing plants. Along the street on either side were rows of black lamp posts with lamps that were obviously magical but now turned off. The kind of old-fashioned looking lamps that still survive in the historic streets of ordinary London, and there they burn by igniting special grids. I wonder who first came up with this design and brought it to another world, even though there were obviously fewer people here, but they looked more solid, much more ordinary, or what there weren't the garish outfits, like on Diagon Alley, as if its visitors had just escaped from the carnival, and even the robes here looked like capes, somewhat old-fashioned cloaks rather than sackcloths with sleeves. The establishments along the street provided services rather than goods. For example, the law firm Barksley & Co., in a 2-story, architecturally austere house. Or, a little further away, an intermediary firm without a specific name, only on a very old, but, not unlike Ollivander, well-kept nameplate, was the inscription intermediary. Contracts, deals, resales. Every 3 densely packed houses had access to a well-kept alleyway where 4 people could be separated without difficulty. They led into small enclosed courtyards where smaller firms, not as old and successful as those on display on the main street, were located. By the way, from this street, you could get to another one, where there were residential districts, though not the best, and another street led directly to the ministry. It would seem that the distances are too small. We're in the Charing Cross area, and the ministry is on Whitehall about 1.5 miles away, but it's magic, Max. By the way, I still don't know what these magical streets are, some kind of dimensional pockets, just hidden areas, or maybe even passages to another world. After wandering through the streets, seeing wizards hurrying and walking with their children, I reached Avalon. The restaurant was in a small French palace manor style and was located on a fairly large, by local standards, fenced area, with a high wall of plants and trees, an artificial waterfall, and a kind of winter garden. Outside, beyond the fence, the view clings to the summer verandas below and the covered mansard-type balconies that occupy 2/3 of the space below the second-floor roofs. I bet that from the inside, from the institution itself, and from the terraces, you get a feeling of alienation from the rest of the world. Only the front entrance through the fence and the street behind it hint that you are still in town. By the way, there are also separately existing establishments of a similar kind outside the city. Still, if you believe the conversations, Avalon is more popular for important meetings because it is located in the business and shopping centre of London. After looking around this way and that, I noticed human rather than elf attendants, a couple of obvious guards, and a few customers on the veranda. But most of the visitors still preferred the more secluded places on the second floor or in the inner halls. I don't have complete information about the place, unfortunately, but even so, I can imagine some escape routes. I'm not an expert in this business, of course, but still. Rowena was able to interpret my slight sense of magic and summarized, an anti-apparition field, like at Hogwarts. Actually, that was the end of my visit here. Lady Greengrass wrote that she would wait for me here at the appointed time. I only need to introduce myself to the staff at the entrance. The next point of my visit was to the house at the Grimmauld Place, for not all matters have yet been settled with Lady Walburga's portrait. It was for this reason that I did not linger any longer in the magical streets of London, and leaving them through the leaky cauldron, took public transport, heading to Grimmauld Place. Chapter 143. Creaker trembled like an aspen leaf in the wind. He trembled but tried his best to pretend that he was not at all scared. But I must admit, he was doing better than yesterday. Sitting in the chair opposite Lady Walburga's portrait in Grimmauld House, I thought about a seemingly simple thing, the Slytherin locket. I wouldn't want to cause unnecessary questions from the portrait of this lady by blatantly and unreasonably ordering Creaker to bring that trinket. And, frankly, I haven't quite figured out what to do with that locket yet. It would be a good idea to destroy it, and that's probably what I'll do. But now, or later, well, that's thinking aside because Lady Walburga is already looking at me suspiciously. Even Creaker disappeared on the sly. Lady Walburga, I have some questions for you that we just absolutely must discuss. Well, Max, ask away. The lady lit her endless painted cigarette, sitting comfortably in an equally painted chair. As you might have guessed, I showed the ring of the head, aka Lord. I met Sirius and came to some sort of agreement about handing over the ring. He gave it up with incredible ease and even joy. Walburga in the portrait only shook her head sadly. However, Sirius said that he didn't care about the ring. He had already prepared some documents. What do you think it might be? Thoughtfully unaristocratic blowing rings of tobacco smoke, Lady Walburga pondered for a dozen seconds. A will or some other census of property. But there's nothing to worry about. The family's property cannot be transferred in this way. At least not without the consent of all its members, and the inheritance of a title within the family is not done that way at all. In this way, this traitor can only transfer his personal property. Similarly, Alfard transferred his house and savings to him. So, in fact, somebody could try to get consent out of me to transfer the family property to someone else. Theoretically, Walburga nodded. Then you should be doubly careful. The only thing that cannot be transferred in any way and that will remain inaccessible to anyone in the event of total extinction is this house and its contents. Of course, various small things can be taken out and sold, and things can be thrown away, donated. But that should be done by Black, not by anyone else, no matter how many rights he had. The last frontier, and it's not for sale. I see. What to do about Sirius? What do you think? In every possible way to distance myself. Right. Honestly, I was worried that you would disagree. I'm only a portrait, Max, Walburga smiled weakly. I can certainly shout and express my opinion. Of course, I would like Sirius to improve, become wiser, and all that. But you do realize that he can't be changed, don't you? Even if he got over himself and started to take over the family, it wouldn't be sincere, it would be without desire, and it would only make things worse. I would like to say that the hard times are over, but no. The crisis is over. Hard times are just coming, and the presence of such an unstable and unpredictable factor as Sirius can only make things worse. Is there any way to close off access to this house? Absolutely. Creaker will do everything. You don't have to worry. But if you're interested, all the literature you need is in the library, and Kriaker will familiarize you with the mechanism for controlling the house's defenses. However, it's a complicated and time-consuming matter, and I'd recommend not wasting your time on it just yet. Good. Kriaker appeared beside me with a clap, immediately materializing a table and arranging tea and cookies. Thank you, I nodded briefly. The house elf, on the other hand, nestled unnoticed in a corner. He's trying to get used to my magic, I wonder. By the way, why was he afraid of me? Kriaker spoke Walburga sharply from the portrait. Deny access to the house for everyone except Lord Black. And you, Max, already softer, in her usual tone, get used to commanding this house elf. All right, I understand. I still have questions. How can I prepare to meet Lady Greengrass? Dress decently. By the way, you didn't tell me about the letter. Oh, nothing much. Lady Greengrass answered quickly and made an appointment at Avalon for tomorrow, for lunch. In Avalon, pondered Walburga. Take the money just in case, and be sure to pay attention to her left-hand rings. If there is a ring of the head, then the meeting is purely business, and she's paying. If not, you're like a young but gentleman. Is it even okay to wear such regalia but not show it? I asked, sipping my hot tea, returning the cup to the table, and twirling the black's ring on my finger. I've told you before that there happen to be times when the real head of the family is not flaunted. There can be all sorts of reasons. I don't know the exact reasons for this in the Greengrass house, but judging from the papers Kriaker reads me, Delphine is still not flaunting the fact of her headship, everywhere pushing forward the tame husband consort. Very few people know about it. Chapter 144. A cup of tea appeared on the table next to Lady Walburga, and the lady immediately took it, and after taking a couple of sips, continued her story. If Delphine comes demonstratively wearing a ring, which is very unlikely, it means that she is already interested in you in absentia. There could be a variety of reasons. Around now, the Greengrass girls, Daphne and Astoria, if memory serves me correctly, should be studying at Hogwarts. Yes, exactly. Daphne is in the same year as me. Astoria is a year younger. Then Delphine might be aware of your striking resemblance to Narcissa. She'll want to have a heart-to-heart talk, get all sorts of information out of the naive Gryffindor, and draw a general picture from the reservations. It was then a matter of technique, a student, a fiancé for one of the girls, and the perfect heir to the Blacks. And it's not too hard for a group of wizards with master's qualifications to catch Sirius and shake out all the information. And if you consider that Lucius has not been seen for a long time, and perhaps he is terminally ill or dead, she can marry the second girl to Malfoy. The right accents and there's a powerful coalition of 3 far-from-last families ready. That's what I would do. The drawn tea in Lady Walburga's cup seemed to come to an end, for she took up her cigarette again. But it was only for a couple of seconds that the lady succumbed to the pernicious influence of bad habits. Speaking of knowledge and other families, Walburga put aside the mouthpiece and cigarette. Usually heirs and just those who will be involved in the affairs of the family are initiated into the intricacies of those very affairs and politics after Hogwarts. The only thing told before is about enemies. So I'm extremely curious as to where young Draco will lead the family, given Lucius such a sudden death. Couldn't Lucius have been teaching Draco something? Hardly. The Malfoys, like us, are creepy snobs and traditionalists for that matter. It amazes me how easily and with such notes of irony you speak of our family, Lady Walburga. I am a portrait, Max, smiled the lady indulgently. In my condition, it is much easier to be ironic about the important things in life. I get it, but how to defend myself if anything? From Delphine? Yes. No need. What do you mean? The answer didn't satisfy me. You meet at Avalon, and you negotiate and sign the contract there if it comes to it. That place is very well protected, and there are always witnesses. All in all, it's a pretty safe place. If it comes to a contract, Be careful about the terms. But like I said before, Delphine is a reasonable lady. You see, Max, a possible apprentice for a master is very important. The training itself can be really tough or even cruel, but the master always treats the apprentice with care because that apprentice will not disappear from the world map after the training. It depends more on the master whether he will be able to forge another master, and later it may well turn out that the newly made master will become a colleague and comrade. If you're worried about green grass's accumulated knowledge in various areas, dangerous and indeed unsettling, then you're wasting your time. Tell me, do you know any spells of the total destruction class? I have a couple in my arsenal, I nodded in response. A couple? You surprise me, young Lord Black, Walburga smiled kindly. But tell me, Max, how often do you use them to solve problems? Never. Exactly. It's the same with necromancy, there's a tool for every problem. Recruiting an apprentice is not a problem worth going against ministry laws, guild rules, jeopardizing the rank of Grand Master, or anything else. Good. She's reasonable. That doesn't make it any easier, but okay. Thanks for the talk. I got up from my chair and nodded to Lady Walburga. Creaker. Out of the shadows in the corner came the house elf. I'd already forgotten he was standing there somewhere. Old Creaker here. Do you know how much spare money there is in the house? Old Creaker knows, respected head, nodded the house elf, as if everything was all right. There are over 150,000 galleons in the vault of the house. The amount of money the house has invested in businesses and enterprises is not known to Creaker. Then, give me 300, I held out the wallet to Creaker, and he accepted it with a slight shiver, immediately disappearing. Lady Walburga. What about the family's affairs? Where is the money, where are they invested, income, profits, deposits and contracts that have not justified themselves? Words cannot express my joy at your willingness to sort through this pile of papers, but it will take a very long time. Thanks to Creaker, I am more or less aware of the current affairs of the magical world. I can assure you that no interference is required yet, and the money invested is working, even if not to the maximum, but quite effectively. True, mostly due to the rigid contracts with the goblins, but do not worry, increasing our money in their interests because of the percentages, and for the gold, goblins would strangle. Even if there's nobody left from the house, they'll continue to multiply our capital without being able to pocket the budget. So far, my intervention is not required. Exactly. But it's worth examining all the documents before the end of the summer and make some decisions. With a clap, Creaker appeared and held out the purse with a slightly trembling hand. He adapts quickly. Taking the purse, I bowed to Lady Walburga, instructed the house elf to keep an eye on the house and any personalities who might express a desire to come here. Told him not to answer serious call. I did what I wanted and left the house, heading back to the Diagon Alley. I would have to study the apparition because these back and forth trips by bus were starting to wear me out. Oh, I should buy a car. Yet. One of my half-brothers, according to John, is not the last person to work for BMW in Germany. There's a reason John has a BMW. Buy it, enchant it for anything and for reduction, and carry it around with me. I know how to drive, and my height allows me to sit comfortably behind the wheel. Chapter 145. Diagon Alley greeted me with even more excitement than this morning, though many people should have been gone by now, having finished their business. But, no, they were bustling, running around, buying and selling things, and postal owls with parcels and letters were flying overhead in flocks, causing me logical concerns about the cleanliness of my clothes. The first thing I did was visit everything for Quidditch. It was a typical sports store, except that the equipment was only for one game. Mannequins with different models of protective equipment, a variety of brooms on the shelves and walls, sets of balls, posters of different teams with autographs, and a lot of fan paraphernalia. By the way, most of this paraphernalia belonged to the Bulgarian and Irish teams, black with burgundy, and soft green colors were dominant in the store. When I approached the smiling salesman in his 30s, I immediately asked, "Hello. Where can I buy tickets to the finals?" "Good afternoon, young wizard." The salesman responded cheerfully but hiding tiredness well. "Of course from us. With a place to park, or just to the stands, in any sector." Conspiratorially leaning forward, the salesman continued much more quietly. "Even close to the ministerial box left," and winked. "Then if you please, 2 with 1 parking and closer to the ministers. If it starts to rain, I do not want to know about it first." "Wise decision, wise, young wizard. That'll be 115 galleons." Nodding, I pulled out my purse and began pulling out stacks of 10 galleons each. Seeing this, the seller, without hesitation, pulled out a rather massive ledger from under the counter and opened it in the middle. "So, your name?" "Maximilian Knight." "Okay. Done." After making a note, the salesman selected tickets from a semblance of a filing cabinet for a couple of seconds. He took out 2, placed them in front of me, inscribed my name in both with the same pen, signed his name, and asked me to touch the tickets with my wand. "Here, your tickets." The parking space, like the stands, is indicated on the ticket itself. You can occupy the parking lot any time from the start of training camp, which is 5 days before the match. "Have a great time." "Thank you." Just as I put the tickets in my bag, the salesman spoke again. "Would you like some paraphernalia, gloves, flags, hats, scarves, maybe even omnioculars?" "I'm afraid not. But can you tell me where to place bets on the outcome of the match?" "Of course. You can't in our place, unfortunately," the salesman said. "However, you can go to the goblins. I'll tell you a secret, even the ministry can't provide more reliable bets. You can't keep track of all the crooks." "Oh, even so, well, thank you." I turned around and headed for the exit while the salesman shouted at the kids who were trying to touch Firebolt, a broomstick that had been unmatched in acceleration and speed for over a year. But unfortunately, or fortunately, I'm not interested in brooms or Quidditch. What the hell made me think of BMWs? I can still see the old but modern M8. There's no information about it in the media or anywhere else, but I do know that there are 1 or more prototypes of this unreleased car. Unfortunately, it will never go into production at all, but that's the little things. A slightly weakened engine from a McLaren F1, 500 plus horses, and that's now in '94. How can I get these thoughts out of my head? I don't even have to buy it, and no one would sell it. A little work with copying spells and permanent transfiguration. Calm down, funny boy. A car like that, with all the modern safety features, is a trip to the other world. You need to be a professional here, though. All right, Rowena, don't spoil the moment of reverie. I got to the massive white bank building, navigating through the crowds of wizards rushing somewhere, and immediately, without a second hesitation, I nodded politely to the goblin gatekeeper and stepped inside. There were a little more visitors than usual, but not a crowd either. True, I had to stand in a small line of 2 for a free employee at the counter. "Hello, sir," I nodded to the goblin. And now that I've grown up, the goblins don't have to step forward to see me. True, they still look down on me, but that will remain so. I bet even Hagrid is somewhat shorter than the goblin behind the counter. "Hello, young wizard," answered the goblin in the tuxedo in an unpleasant squeaky voice and grinned. "What can I do for you?" "I would like information on the betting odds for the upcoming Quidditch World Cup Finals match." "Sure. Here's a booklet." The goblin quickly held out a typically folded pamphlet with colored magical photographs. I accepted the booklet, but my questions remained. "Oh, thank you very much, and I will certainly look into it. However, I am interested in the odds on a single bet." The goblin raised one eyebrow questioningly. "Snape style seems to be a contagious disease. Krum will get the snitch, but Ireland will win." "A very interesting bet," the goblin opened the ledger and deliberately slowly guided the sheets with his hooked clawed finger, causing muffled annoyance to the hurrying wizards behind me. 17.5 to 1. Maximum winnings. The goblin hinted not very subtly, tapping the stack of pamphlets with his finger. Good. I'll be back. Stepping away from the main crowd of people and nestling in the corner of the hall, I opened the pamphlet and immersed myself in the reading. Inside there were various conditions, bets, advertisements for the event itself, and reasons why a wizard simply must bet at Gringotts and nowhere else. The maximum winnings are 500,000 galleons, which is a pretty solid sum, so what's the wager? They're supposed to be 28,572 galleons rounded up. Great. Chapter 146. From the bank, I went at once to Twilfit and Tattings, a good atelier. It was time to update my closet, and a more expensive atelier than Madame Malkin's robe store would be perfect for this purpose. The reason for choosing an atelier is simple: a greater variety of different models and a variety of fabrics. As I've learned in the time I've spent in the magical world, there are two kinds of magical fabrics. Those made from wool or some other products of life of magical animals, and materials obtained from ordinary animals and plants, which grew up among magic and in magical backgrounds for several generations. This does not make the latter exactly magical animals. Still, because of the natural adaptation to the environment, such fabrics, though somewhat worse to hold magic and enchantments, are much better than those that are not magical at all. In general, Madame Malkin either has outright consumer goods or too high class of fabrics with extremely limited models due to pre-cut blanks. Atelier Twilfit and Tattings was not much different from an ordinary clothing store: a bright room, mannequins in various outfits, closets and racks with fabric samples, and various clothing accessories could be found in the windows. I was greeted by a smiling girl in a strict dress and robe, and after a nice but short chat, we decided on my order and took measurements. I agreed to pick up later, having paid half in advance and received a receipt with a magical signature. Now, almost with a clear conscience and a sense of fulfilled duty, I went back to Grimmauld Place. I can think fast, and I'm clever in some places, but I'm not very good at planning. No need to say. When I returned to Grimmauld, I disturbed Creaker, who was busy repairing the stairs. He was restoring the steps to look like new and not creaky. "You're back already?" Walburga hastened to note my appearance. "Yes, lady, but not for long again." Creaker. Old Creaker is listening intently. The house elf was torn between the need to approach me while at the same time holding the dismantled step in the middle of the stairs. "You don't have to come up. I need 28,572 galleons, and at the end of August, that amount will rise appreciably." Walburga looked at me silently, studying me. Creaker, on the other hand, had managed to restore the step back to its original form, and at least it had taken its place. Almost rolling down the stairs, Creaker straightened his pillowcase and came closer, shuddering a little. "Can old Creaker dissuade St. respected head from doing rash things?" "I don't think so. I can see that," came from the portrait. "If you are confident in your decision and in case of failure you are ready to accept the loss of a rather significant amount, then your will, Max. You are Lord Black, after all, except that money doesn't come out of thin air. Tell that to the goblins who profit from the interest. But I'm pretty sure I can make that money grow, not lose it." Creaker. I held out my wallet to the house elf. "You need a bigger purse." The house elf squeaked and disappeared with a clap. Just a couple of seconds later, the house elf reappeared, holding a slightly larger pouch. "Exactly 28,572 galleons, respected head." Taking the pouch, I thanked the house elf. "The treasury is emptying." The house elf muttered quietly, turning back to fixing the stairs. To this, I could only chuckle, so I did so, leaving the house. Once again, the shuttle bus takes me around the city to the leaky cauldron, so unloved by me. Once again, I nodded to the bartender Tom, and made my way to the back of the pub, opening a passageway to the Diagon Alley with my wand. Once again, the thought of my lack of planning skills visited me because did I know I was going to bet I did. What prevented me from knowing all this on my first visit to the alley? Well, nothing. The main thing is to draw conclusions and make a better plan of action. Although, in my particular case, the emphasis should not be on the word better but on the word make. When I got to the bank, I went up to the same goblin and told him I wanted to bet my money on the Quidditch World Cup finals. Of course, the goblin gladly agreed to accept the bet, and after hearing the amount, walked me through the corridors of the bank to a separate office, where we made a contract for the bank's betting services. There was not a single alarming or suspicious clause. By the way, I found out that the rates are a little bit lower because of the interest in the winnings that the bank takes. But, on the other hand, goblins are very scrupulous about money. Also, if you don't see something in the contract, it's entirely your fault. I, in turn, have checked everything and made sure that the deal is safe. Rowena has analyzed it. Chapter 147. I left Gringotts with the next receipt and a copy of the contract for today, safely hiding them in my unchanging bag, the belt of which habitually weighs on my shoulder. It is funny because the habit of my past life, of adjusting the strap on my shoulder, is back. A couple of times, I noticed that I was trying to fix it even when there was no need for it. Very strange feeling, forgotten, but somehow pleasant. I wandered around Diagon Alley for a while and looked in the bookstore, searching for something interesting, but everything seemed too dull after the restricted section. I visited the store of magic animals and was surprised by enlivened snakes trying to whisper something, praise their enclosure, or complain about bad mice. What they want from me? Perhaps it is the influence of the basilisk soul after all, I have not checked. But the snakes were trying to speak out. I did not ignore the Fortescue Cafe, ordering hot chocolate and a portion of regular ice cream with chocolate chips. I do not like the frills in the ice cream. It was only after all this travelling through London's main magical shopping street that I finally went into the Twilfit and Tattings atelier to pick up my order. There I changed my clothes in the big dressing room. What can I say? If I change my hair, I'll look like Percival Graves, but blonde and with a completely different face. I can't help it, I can't dress colorfully and youthfully. Black and white colors, suits, vests, shoes or boots, turtlenecks, shirts. Of course, I can wear jeans and t-shirts, and there are tracksuits, but I don't see much difference between them, as long as they're not pink. Over a conversation with a saleswoman, I learned about how to do stable charms on clothes. It turned out, though I might have guessed it, that they use very complex proprietary chains of runes. They're even patented by the relevant Ministry Bureau, so even if you figure it out and calculate the materials and the potion impregnation to embroider them, you can't use them for commercial purposes, of course. But on the whole, I think I will study this direction myself someday because the small range of fitting clothes and the greater range of comfortable temperature are pretty useful knowledge. I adhere to the opinion that the wizard must be a self-sufficient unit and should be able to survive in the most diverse and adverse conditions. Anyway, a little refreshed in terms of clothing, now with a definitively clear conscience, I left Diagon Alley and took the next shuttle bus to the Knights. Look how handsome you've grown, Sarah smiled at me from the doorway. When are you going to get a girlfriend? First of all, I'm a wizard. I need to study. Where can I find time for girls? I advise you not to delay, she wagged her finger with a smile. Other boys will take all the beauties. The world is not limited to England alone. Sit down to lunch, wizard. After a hearty lunch, the first thing I did was dial Hermione's number. Hello. Mrs. Granger, it's Max Knight. Can I hear Hermione? Max, what an unexpected call. Sure. 1 second. From its sound, the receiver was placed on something wooden, and a couple of moments later, I distinctly heard very fast footsteps. Max. Yeah, hi, Hermione. Hi. Something happened? No, just wanted to say hello and ask how are you doing? Everything is fine. The holidays have just begun. What's up? There's Sarah walking around, smiling snidely and pretending she has a lot to do in close proximity to me and the phone. Sarah, oh, the foster mom. Why? Well, I called a girl, myself, and there was some talk about girls earlier, like, get yourself a girlfriend. My ex. Yet. Nothing. Why do you call her by her first name? Well, I kind of know I'm adopted. Also, I remember and know my mother very well. Besides, nobody objects here. Weird. And we've already decided where we're going to France, and we've even bought tickets. Can you imagine? It's as if I guessed then in the common room. Too nice. There's so much to do. The sea, vacations, museums. Do you think you've opened your third eye? A pseudo-scientific statement. I can scientifically explain to you the possibility of prediction in terms of multiple universe theory. Quite scientific, by the way. No, thank you. I'll read it myself. Isn't a similar idea used in string theory? Exactly. Then Sarah's voice came from the hallway. And in Everett's interpretation. This was unexpected. Hermione was pensively silent. I didn't know that. I'll have to look for more information. Surely there are good public libraries in Nice. Earth to research ship Granger. PSH. There was a sorrowful sigh in response to me. Voice. Earth reports that there are 2 tickets available for excellent seats to the championship final. It remains to find an escort. Can you hear me? Yes, I'm here. When do you have time to do everything? All I had time to do was sleep and tell my parents about my adventures and accomplishments. Adventures. Nothing out of the ordinary, and it's mostly other people's adventures, from girly gossip. I see. Hermione, when are you leaving? Oh, it's tomorrow. For 2 weeks. Interesting. I have an appointment with a combat master tomorrow. If I'm lucky, I might be able to go into an apprenticeship. I can't even imagine how to combine it with Hogwarts. But anyway, this experience is better to get with a mentor than in an actual magical battle. I'll ask if she needs another apprentice. If so, I'll recommend you. You seem pretty talented. Oh, come on. I'm not that talented. You're better at a lot of things. Don't belittle your accomplishments. You're the best among peers at everything. Besides, what would I do without you? You can think, analyze, and compare facts, and I can only memorize and practice all sorts of crap. Everyone who can learn occlumency can do that, and practice is persistence and hard work. The ability to think is not given to everyone. Yet. Really. Anyway, I'll recommend you, and if she's interested, I'll introduce you. If not, I'll help you with the same program. That's good news. I hope this master will be interested in you. We talked about everything else for a few more minutes, but soon Hermione was called by her mother to help with something, and our conversation ended there. Now I must somehow prepare for my meeting with Lady Greengrass. Perhaps knowledge of etiquette. Sarah knows a lot in this area. It's just that it's not customary for us to be overly polite. Chapter 148. That's the kind of request I came up to Sarah with, which resulted in 5 hours of Etiquette for Dummies master class. The usual etiquette was fine, or at least as close as possible to magical etiquette, except for the nuances with the wand. I had noticed some elements of the peculiarities of carrying a wand, but I had not interpreted them in any way. Also, Lady Walburga didn't pay much attention to such things, but perhaps she just couldn't imagine that someone suddenly didn't know the basics. However, it was not Sarah's extensive knowledge of the smallest details of etiquette in various countries that surprised me, but the fact that I already knew many things, and they were carried out by themselves. Approximately estimating the reasons of such behavior, I understood that though the knights do not pay special attention to etiquette, they taught me everything very unobtrusively and without long instructions, just by personal example. That's what experience and not being the first child in the family means. Now she was explaining to me small nuances that might not be noticed, ignored, and most of it was devoted not at all to the purpose of this or that cutlery, which, by the way, is easy to handle if the table is already served. Just use the cutlery in the order of serving dishes from edge to center. However, with French serving, as practiced at Hogwarts, this is hard to do. Everything on the table, take what you want, and orient yourself. In the regular world, this arrangement hasn't been practiced for a long time. I wonder what happens in Avalon most likely, since there are attendants there, then the Russian serving of dishes, which is already familiar to everyone all over the world. Sarah touched on other nuances, like, for example, styles of dress for different occasions, strict business style, not so strict, casual, and so on. How to wear certain things, how and when to button or unbutton a jacket, and many other little things that I did but did not realize. For example, I never wore a vest under a double-breasted jacket. Why, it didn't seem right to me. But you could wear something other than a shirt under a double-breasted jacket. My favorite turtleneck, for example. My perfect memory allowed me to remember everything perfectly and immediately sort it out. Rowena took the initiative to analyze everything, which resulted in an hour and a half of almost imperceptible, at the very edge of my consciousness, mental images of modeling different situations. And, according to her, it turned out that her simulation stimulated the entire nervous system in an amusing way, as if I were practicing all these situations in reality. Yes, the efficiency is 15 times lower than for real actions, but the rate of simulation is 5 times higher. In general, by the evening, we had finally figured out the various nuances of etiquette. I should note that all this heap of information, nuances, and subtleties can make a repulsive impression just by its volume for an unprepared person from a village. There is nothing to talk about. Table etiquette is a little bit complicated and not understandable, and if you add wine etiquette to it, you can hang yourself. However, when you observe how other people observe these subtleties in full or in part, when you yourself take part and are unobtrusively dragged into it, you may realize, as I do now, that you know and understand everything and you do many things unknowingly. Of course, I didn't learn all the nuances of etiquette with Sarah today, far from it, but I got a good foundation for consciously applying the skills and rules I already knew. At family dinner, I casually broached the subject of Knight's eldest son working at the BMW and asked, "Is it possible to see what it's like in Germany? Can I see a prototype of the M8, since I know for sure it's there?" In the end, John assured me that he would call his son and clarify everything, because he himself was wondering what kind of a beast, the 8M series, as a couple of 850s, though not CSI, drive around London, blurring the eyes of motorists. After dinner, I went to my room and, until the night, worked with acclumency, trying to engage Rowena in the process. Since she passes through the full range of my sensations, thoughts, and other activities, she was assigned to observe my mental state during the meeting with Lady Greengrass. Her ability to visualize clearly would allow me to mentally interpret various thought processes into images. It is not practiced because it is too difficult, but it is possible to try it, and the application of such techniques with Rowena's help can quickly reach the level of semblance of reflexes and habits. Only by midnight was I finished with everything, went to the shower, and after, a healthy sound sleep. Chapter 149. The morning of the second full day of vacation began, as always, with exercise. Yesterday's momentary weakness, the desire to do nothing and lie down despite the habits hammered into the body, disappeared without a trace. Jogging through the still sleeping streets in the light of the rising sun, working with my own weight on an empty sports field in a nearby park. It's funny how much you get used to Hogwarts in 2 semesters, now an ordinary town seems strange. Strange people, strange houses, strange cars. And everything around is somewhat monotonous and gloomy, though the rays of the morning sun add color. After the traditional morning shower and breakfast with the knights, I got dressed in a new grave-style suit, except I wore shoes instead of boots. To avoid the morning bus rush, I asked John for a ride to Grimwald Place. I gave a ring to Kriaker for safekeeping, and then, with John again, I drove to the Leaky Cauldron. Another person would have asked the reasonable question, why don't you use Kriaker? The answer is obvious. Who knows how many people would recognize him as the Black's house elf unknown? If knowledgeable people can only draw obvious parallels between me and Narcissa Malfoy, née Black, then seeing me with the house elf of the most ancient and noble house will definitively recognize the full picture. What to expect then, who knows? Of course, my secret would be out soon. It's enough for Sirius to go to the Grimwald house and get a kick out of it. After the 4th year, the Phoenixes will begin to assemble, and the Order has only this house as an asset that is truly protected. At least, I think so. In general, everyone there will know that young Maximilian Knight is not just a knight not only in appearance but now in fact as well. It was with these thoughts that I walked along Diagon Alley in a crowd of variegated wizards again scurrying back and forth, busy with their own affairs. When I reached the outskirts of Avalon, I wandered into a dark alleyway, casting every conceivable spell of secrecy on myself. Now, unseen, inaudible, and emitting no scent, I wandered around the neighborhood, scattering the outlines of the grimoire's magical traps here and there. They would come in handy if I had to retreat. The traps were activated mentally, by my command, so I knew there would be no accidental triggers, and my perfect memory would keep me from forgetting where they were at a moment's notice. I tried to distribute them around by Rowena's sketches of escape routes. I never cease to be amazed at this unique thing in my head. It seems that I have planned, calculated, designed, and so on, but it took a minimum of mental effort, creating a feeling of foreignness of this knowledge as if someone just downloaded a ready-made result. I was busy setting traps until almost the time of the meeting and returned to the entrance of the Avalon 10 minutes before the meeting, unmasked. I don't know what Lady Greengrass looks like, so I should go inside, talk to the servants, and go to the already reserved table. Stepping through the arch of the gate, I moved confidently along the stone walkway toward the main entrance to Avalon. I felt slight vibrations of magic but didn't have time to interpret them in any way, unlike Rowena. Looks like a temporal mark with an undetermined affiliation factor. Friend or foe, to be determined later. Okay, I understood. The usher, a young guy in his mid-20s, opened the door in front of me. At the entrance, I was almost immediately confronted by the hostess stand, where 2 girls in strict dresses just below the knees and in French-style cape robes, slightly shortened on all fronts, were minding their own business. Good afternoon. Pleased to welcome you at Avalon, one of the hostesses spoke to me with a smile. My name is Hannah. Do you already have a reservation, or would you like to choose? Good day, miss. I have a table reserved for 2 for lunch. Number 203. Would you be so kind as to say your name? Maximilian Knight. The girl blinked thoughtfully for the briefest of moments without losing her very natural and welcoming smile. Please follow me, Hannah smiled invitingly, waving her hand and making sure I followed her. She moved toward the massive wooden staircase to the 2nd floor. It is not customary to look around and certainly not look at other visitors, but nobody cancelled the lateral vision. It's a pleasant place, and the design is also pleasant, though mixed up with everything. There are also notes of the Renaissance, heavy, expensive, with the predominance of shades of beige, dark wood trim, and monograms. Well, I'm not an architect. I do not know the names of all these elements. There were elements of the typical Middle Ages too, but they were expressed in some small decorative elements. In the far corners of the hall, the atmosphere and tones were a little gloomy and the decorations more angular. It looked as if you were about to see a typical smoke-and noir gangster from 20s Chicago in the midst of these somber tones. The 2nd floor was about the same, except there were more secluded tables along the walls, and most of the room was a kind of mansard with separate tables on balconies. It was this table, on the balcony, that Hannah led me to. It was round, with a white tablecloth, already set with cutlery and crockery, and a crystal carafe of water in the middle. "Will you order something?" "I'd prefer to wait." There was no need to designate the status of who exactly to wait for, and so the girl nodded. Another girl appeared beside her but in a slightly different uniform, though the differences were almost subtle. "This is Catherine. She will be your waitress today," Hannah introduced her colleague, and she bowed slightly in a polite bow. Then both of them left, leaving me alone. Chapter 150. From the corner of my eye, I noticed the small number of wizards around, but what caused a little annoyance was that there was Malfoy, Nott, Parkinson, and Daphne Greengrass. They were sitting at the same table, eating lunch, not forgetting to burn me with their gaze. It's good that now they are busy with lunch, and while eating, you shouldn't be distracted. I hope they will eat for a long time, and better, all the time. In general, there are differences from the usual restaurants, and the first thing that catches my eye is the lack of a closet. Well, we are wizards. We can deal with clothes. Service seems to be usual, but something different, subtly different. For a few minutes, I sat there, thinking that Malfoy and company were going to run out of food. That he was going to come over and start some attempt to insult me for the sake of self-aggrandizement. But so far, he was eating, and he was trying to do it quickly, looking at me and his companions with displeasure as they started to eat more slowly. It's really funny. In fact, there are plenty of excuses to leave the table. My thoughts were interrupted by Hannah coming up the stairs, accompanied by a tall blonde in a dark blue closed gown below her knees, strict, without unnecessary embellishments, a black sleeveless fitted robe. Her hair, of a cold hue, was gathered into a simple, tall hairdo, with only a small pendant to adorn it. Judging by the direction of the couple's movement, my expectations were somewhat off. Ho ho! I also thought that Delphine would be plus or minus Walburga's age, but here she is. Look how she moves. Rowena instantly downloaded into my brain an interpretation of the lady's fluid movements. Blade, stiletto, assassin. She moves very smoothly. Rising from my chair, I took a step toward her. Maximilian Knight, I presume the lady spoke with a slight smile. She was also quite tall in relative proximity, and it's a good thing she wasn't in high heels, or I would have felt uncomfortable. Ah, I wish I could grow up sooner. I hope I'll make it to my usual -85. You're quite right, Lady Greengrass, and that was her, for there was a rather obvious resemblance to Daphne. Nobody gave a hand to anyone, but this is not surprising, there is no trust in the other side. As it should be, I pushed a chair aside for a lady and only then took my seat. I looked back at Draco and company. Only Daphne seemed to recognize my companion, but the guys could be forgiven. We were practically at the other end of a rather large hall, and their position was such that Delphine had her back to them the whole time. I have to be honest, Delphine spoke up. I was extremely surprised to receive a letter from you. May I ask what exactly? Well, a young wizard in Muggle-born status, not yet graduated from Hogwarts, a student of the Godric Gryffindor house, where social connections and information have been neglected for decades, writes a letter to a master whose status as a master is nowhere advertised. That should be interesting at the very least, shouldn't it? Absolutely, I replied with a smile upon a smile. But wouldn't it be wise to gather information regardless of house? Reasonableness and Gryffindor, as if Lady Delphine had tasted the words. Those words too rarely occur in the same sentence, and it's not prejudice, it's statistics. Here, I have to agree. There are a regrettably small number of reasonable wizards to be found in our house. What about you? Mr. Knight didn't fail to emphasize the last name with a smile and intonation. For a brief moment, I admired the not-so-typical English type, something Nordic and Western European. Besides, Delphine looks too young, and I thought she would be in a different age category. Yet, somewhere in the middle, if you look globally, but obscenely intelligent for the house. At least I dare hope so. Let's hope so, Mr. Knight. Isn't it time we took advantage of the service this establishment provides and had lunch? I completely agree with you. Taking the menu in our hands, we immersed ourselves in studying it, but just a few seconds later, Delphine spoke up. It seems they've learned how to make something new here again. Another Italian pasta, a strangled priest, that's adorable. Finding this menu item with my eyes, I only saw the name in Italian, though I understood it. Many cuisines around the world have unconventional names. I decided to keep the conversation going. I remember encountering son-in-law's eggs in Thai cuisine. Despite the name, the dish has quite an ordinary story. A young guy's mother-in-law suddenly showed up, and there was no food in the house. Also, the guy did not know how to cook. So he boiled chicken eggs, fried them in butter, and poured the sauce from what he had at hand: palm sugar, tamarind juice, and soy sauce. Indeed, Delphine smiled after listening. And what a promising name, after all. But there are surprises in English cuisine, too. How do you feel about raisin puddings? Oh, you mean that one, the one that is spotted? Absolutely. A never-ending joke to all the uninitiated. Yes, and for the initiated too. An acquaintance of mine from France long resented refusing to eat a dish with that name. After a few more seconds, Delphine spoke again. I'm getting more and more inclined to step away from tradition a little bit and order a full lunch. I have been living in England for so long, and I still cannot get used to the fact that dinner is called lunch here. Neither am I. It promises to be a busy day, and I'm not sure when my next meal will be. Likewise. So we decided. As soon as we put the menu aside, a waitress literally materialized next to us. Catherine stood nearby during the conversation, tactfully giving time for conversation and choice. After handing over the order, I was surprised that the wait was only a couple of minutes. Magic, though.
That is all for today. Thank you for watching. If you've enjoyed this journey, make sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell. If you have any suggestions or feedback for me, please drop a comment down below.